Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I think I'll be giving my extended thoughts on the game Scorn. It's a game that has been rather integral to my channel, and now that it is out I have quite a few thoughts about it. This isn't going to be a theory video, I'm going to work on something like that later. Instead I want to talk about the game, the gameplay, the cut content, what I liked, what I didn't like, what I think are actual objective flaws, and what are actual objective benefits or good things in the game. For this video, I'll be talking over some footage I recorded of the game, both the prologue and the rest of the game itself. The game certainly has changed compared to what they've said in previous builds and updates. For example, they said there would be no cutscenes, and yet the game quite literally starts with a cutscene. I don't think that's a terrible problem, it's just a slight change in design philosophy, and one that's the entire game is sandwiched within. There's a cutscene at the beginning of the game, there's a cutscene at the end of the game. It may be rendered within the game's engine, but that's a rather common thing in this day and age. There aren't really any pre-rendered cutscenes to be found in games anymore, because graphical quality has gotten to the point where just rendering the cutscene live as it's happening is easy, efficient, and can still look good. I do find it rather interesting that we start out as a character who is not our own, and yet at the same time he kind of is. This Scorn person, the protagonist Scorn guy, eventually becomes a parasite that latches on to our proper main character, in some ways becoming a dual protagonist. Scorn is a game that prides itself in not really explaining anything to you. It doesn't give you the answers outright through audio files or written notes or cutscenes, so the parasitic creature would certainly be a major mystery, and there is still some mystery surrounding it as to how exactly being covered in strange white goop turns you into a parasite, or if that even is what turned you into a parasite and there's not some other creature running around. Any information you can get about the game's lore and story is certainly welcome in a game that, again, prides itself in being as cryptic as possible. And though the last area, Polis, does tend to be very heavy in the information presented, there still is a rather enjoyable sense of environmental storytelling where you can extrapolate what the things are and what they do based on visuals and trying to connect them with things we have on our own Earth. Rather fitting, the first area you go to in the game is the first area that was shown off ever. The first area that was even built for the game. The prologue area is the same as the area in the pre-alpha trailers, though there are some very distinct differences in aesthetic and asset design. I've made my criticisms known in previous videos about how I prefer a lot of the aesthetical looks of the pre-alpha trailer compared to the final build, and I still stand by that. I find that the area in the final build can look a bit too similar to some of the later areas you go to in the game, whereas a pre-alpha build, if it was just, made more texture quality, asset quality, whatever, but still kept the kind of look and color of it, would have stood out much more significantly as its own unique area. I think that other places tend to do this job alright. The field that you wake up in later and Polis look unique compared to the crater factory area in the middle of the game. When you first get the wrist key, I think that's when many players understood the general tone of the game. It's not just the Gigerian architecture that's weird, it's a fact that it's painful and cruel as well. This isn't a satisfying place to be, it's not an area that creatures thrive in. It's an area where creatures are used and disposed of accordingly. One thing that I really do like about the game is the small details in animation. That brief in-game cutscene of Scorn guy trying to pull his arm out of the wrist key machine, there's at least 2 other moments where you get a wrist key and the animations are different for each of them. This scene also makes me think a lot about the kind of design philosophy they had to figure out when it comes to what you can and cannot interact with. A lot of the elements in Scorn's world look as detailed and intricate as the machinery you actually can utilize, and being on an alien-like world, it is difficult to understand what is something that can be manipulated and what's something that can't be. In a normal game taking place in a human environment, you can quickly figure out what assets are worthwhile, but on Scorn, you have to wonder what's usable and what's just background design. Initially, I kind of thought that the prologue was a rather poor representation of the final game or rest of the game, area-wise. It's a rather open-ended area, placed with many hallways and rooms to go into, whereas a lot of the game is pretty linear. And that still does ring true to a degree, even in confusing areas like the crater area with a giant creature. It still is a rather linear progression, but you are able to backtrack and wander around the whole circular facility if you want. Though it does seem to be much closer design-wise to Paulus, which is also a rather open-ended area with a lot of different hallways and rooms to go to. Ones that can be unlocked over time and ones that are just immediately available the moment you set foot in the desecrated city. This is, in part, where I think Scorn ended up biting its own ass in regards to many people's first playthrough. The architecture and alien design does make it genuinely confusing as to where you're supposed to go, and a lot of players probably end up just brute forcing their way forward. If this doesn't work, move on to the next area and try that. If that doesn't work, then move on to the next area. That can be engaging gameplay for many, trying to figure out the strange nature of the world. But given the mixed reviews Scorn has on Steam, it's safe to say it's not for everyone. And I guess that's one of the problems with me doing a video like this. I've followed the game very closely. It's lived rent-free in my head for years. I started knowing about the game in 2016, and in 2017 I started this channel coming out swinging with videos on the Kickstarter demo. So I know what I'm getting into. I know what kind of game this is and how it plays. A lot of people don't, and in some ways that's kind of the trailer's fault. Because the trailers emphasize quite often the combat during the straight gameplay sections. The 2017 trailer and the October 2020 trailer were both in combat-heavy areas, whereas the Prologue, the Field, and Paulus are very exploration-heavy areas, very puzzle-heavy areas. Nonetheless, the fault isn't completely on Ebb Software and their marketing division, if they even have such a thing. The Doug Bradley trailer, as I like to call it, stated outright that Scorn is not a shooter, and the devs have constantly referred to this as a survival horror. The fact that so many people just fundamentally do not understand what this game is supposed to play like confuses me. It plays like a survival horror game, like Resident Evil or Silent Hill. Yes, you can fight back against the monsters, but that doesn't mean you're Turbo McBadass shoot everything, man. The first thing you really do that you're supposed to do is this puzzle here. It's a rather simple puzzle in concept. There's one of these pods, these egg-looking things, that needs to be moved to that glowing slot. but there's other egg-looking things that are just unfortunately in the way. So you need to maneuver the non-usable egg things in such a way to allow the pod to go through. This puzzle is a great filter. It's something that has caused many people to not even get the first achievement of the game. And on top of that, even if they do get that achievement, even if they do finish this puzzle, it might set an unfair tone for their perception of the rest of the game. It is admittingly difficult. It is something that might not just strictly be skill issue, but a rather challenging experience in of itself. The first time that I played this puzzle, I was somewhat drunk, and so that definitely hampered my ability to finish it. There is a way to do it that requires very, very few moves and manipulations, but it's something you wouldn't really figure out until you do this puzzle multiple times. I know it's probably not the best advice to say to make something easier, though I suppose the advice could be forgiven when it is the very first actual puzzle challenge in the game. But I do think that if they just removed one of these non-usable egg pods, maybe one of the ones in the lowermost area, that would have made it so that a lot more people would have been able to solve it. It would have allowed for more variations in how this is manipulated, and allow for people to better put the non-usable pods behind them. This area also comes face to face with the previous issue I've mentioned, the perception of the game people had. The very first thing they do is really solve a puzzle, moving something left, right, up, down. There's no shooting, there's no enemies, there's really no losing condition. Even if you're just stuck here and just give up, that's not so much a losing condition as it is just you not playing the game. So you can't die here, you can't reset. And I think that might also be an issue with the puzzle. There's no way to reset. During my first playthrough, I had some difficulty with it. I thought, alright, what if I just put everything back where it was originally and then try again from scratch? Being unable to reset meant I had to restart the game entirely, or the prologue, at least, which meant I had to watch that unskippable cutscene, go through a few more smaller kind cutscene-esque moments, and then get to this point. The devs probably couldn't figure out a way to actually implement such a system, resetting the board, in such a way that it would make sense in the game's universe, and they can't just have it instantly teleport back to all of its original positions, because that would come off as being too video gamey. But at the same time, if Scorn is a video game, I think that it should be willing to accept the fact that some people are going to see moments where it really does come across that's a video game. It may seem like I'm being a bit too harsh on this puzzle and too uncompromising, and maybe in some ways I am. But the fact that it has caused so many people to just drop the game, the fact that it has kind of skewed the perception of what the nature of the challenges of the rest of the game will be like, does warrant that kind of criticism. It's just not a particularly well-placed puzzle, something probably best fit for a later section in the game rather than the very first real thing that you do. You can see even here, after I've played through it once and gone back to the game again, but forgot the speedrun strat, how many different manipulations and bits of trial and error I had to go through to even solve this thing. For some people, it is just a case of skill issue, being unable to solve a single puzzle in a video game that doesn't advertise itself as being a shooter, but more of a puzzle game, and then they're surprised when there's puzzles. But for many, I think it is just straight up bad game design, an issue in the design philosophy regarding how the beginning of a game should operate. Again, if just one of these non-usable molds were removed, more people would have gotten through it and experienced the rest of the game. Or if it was a challenge you had to face later on in the game, people would have likely seen it as just an upping in difficulty that's natural in game design. They could have come up with a different means of making a puzzle where you have to grab Mold Man, but it's not exactly this one. Now, Mold Man is a rather interesting character in of himself. He's the first, humanoid you come across until the very end of the game. He's one of the very, very few non-hostile entities, and that applies to whether you're near him or far from him. He's also a bit of a fan favorite. During the Kickstarter campaign, someone asked one of the developers if he'll be in the game. That person even linked a picture of Mold Man to that developer to make it explicitly clear who he's talking about, and the developer actually said, "That thing? No." In some ways, I do wonder if that's just a case of genuine ignorance, or if the game would have started very differently than how it does now. Perhaps getting the additional funding from Kickstarter and the unknown benefactor between the 2014 and 2017 period has resulted in quite a bit of change. Maybe this room entirely was not here, and something else would have led to Scorn Guy getting into the meat pillar room and turning into the parasite. I can't say for certain because for whatever reason I've lost access to the 2017 Kickstarter demo. It's no longer on my Steam list, meaning I have no option to fire up Model Viewer and check for myself to verify. After all, if this was in what would have been the final build of the game in 2018, then those models likely would have been in the game files proper. In many ways, Mold Man is sort of an exploration of the human psyche, in the sense that despite being this disgusting, meaty glob packed into a hard shell, a lot of people found him to be cute and endearing, possibly because of the rather large eyes he has. It reminds me a bit of the prawns from District 9. People found those things to be sympathetic, and that's in large part due to their eyes, despite the fact that the rest of them quite honestly looks like a weird insect monster. The moans, groans, and painful cries he makes when you attach machinery to him or scoop him or use a saw on him also lends credence to that, and I do think it's intentional. I think the developers really wanted you to like this character. After all, it adds into the theme of Scorn being just a cruel, nightmarish place. Even something as innocent as this weird mold person who, quite frankly, might have just been born the last hour, even he does not escape the painful cruelty and industry of Scorn society. There is an option to kill him, and there is an option to free him, presented in the form of having a machine that looks a bit like an ice cream scoop, and a machine that looks like a buzzsaw. The devs, I think, utilized our own perceptions to kind of trick us with this. You would think that if you want to free him, you use a scoop. You're just scooping him out of his mold. And if you want to kill him, well, what better means of execution than a buzzsaw? There is some environmental detail, such as a hole in the scoop area, that might lead people to cluing in that it might not be the salvation for our friend here, but I think most gamers will miss that even when paying attention to the architecture and environment during their first playthrough. The fact that on both Xbox and Steam, the Kill Mold Man achievement has been obtained far more than the Free Mold Man achievement indicates this quite well. And this is even with the benefit of being able to watch Let's Plays and see other people free our little buddy here. One kind of problem I have with this area is you just don't really get much context into what all this machinery is for, all the background details. Yeah, mold people look to be stuffed in them and painfully dying in abject fear, but what exactly does the machine do? What's a processing that these mold people undergo? They do have names in the files, but that doesn't really illuminate stuff, at least not for the prologue area as far as I can tell. It really does leave me wondering what the original build was like, a question I've had many times when playing this game and even more when finding out what has been removed. Was there more intricacy to this area? Was there more machineries that you can use and a larger element to the overall environmental puzzle? This whole room, this whole area is effectively a puzzle box. You have to figure out what to do in order to unlock the next part, and then you eventually get to the center. For me, that probably would have been a lot more interesting, getting more in-depth detail into how this particular facility worked. But I suppose for most people, it would have just dragged on the game more and more, and caused them to want to play less and less because it's still not the area that they saw in the gameplay trailers with the shooting and combat. Something that really did come out of left field was being able to free Mold Man. No one even assumed that you'd be able to do that. After all, the Mold Man model that was posted on ArtStation by the guy who, modeled him, every shot of that is him in his shell. Maybe it's something that they added in later on, a choice, a moral choice that they wanted the player to make, that they would be able to also make similar choices later on in the game. It does somewhat affect gameplay progression in the prologue, though not particularly much in the sense that you still have to go to the exact same machine, and then you go to the two consoles by the big door, and the exact same thing happens. In fact, if there's one criticism I can levy at this scene, it's effectively useless. Like, it doesn't change anything beyond having to have this slow, moldy man follow you around for a few minutes, rather than just grabbing his arm, sticking it in a thing, sticking it in another thing, and opening a door. There is a cool detail that the door will stay open if you just use his arm, and it will close behind you if you free Mold Man, as if he got out of that situation and wandered elsewhere. But you don't see that when you return to the area. In fact, it's pretty difficult to see the door at all, and it doesn't affect whether or not you can go back down into this kind of circular room with the command center and all, rather than just a preordained path given to you by the developers. In a recent Ask Me Anything, or maybe it was just a Kickstarter Q&A session, the devs did say that you'll have to play through the game multiple times in order to get all the achievements, and that really does just seem like a technically yes, but no, not really, because the only branching achievement that you can get is whether or not you kill or free Mold Man. You play through the start of the game, you play through the start of the game again, you play through the rest of the game once, congratulations, you have 100% achievement completion. And again, it's kind of hard to judge morality. For this situation here and now, you can probably make the argument that it would have been far less cruel just to kill him rather than to free him. But I was really hoping that Mold Man's role in the game would have had some larger effect on the rest of the story. Considering that the Prologue Scorn guy here eventually becomes a parasite, they could have used it as an opportunity to set up the tone and behavior of the parasite later on in the game. This moment right here, freeing or killing Mold Man, could have even had an effect on the ending. If you're cruel to Mold Man and you just use him as a means to an end, a resource to be murdered and utilized, then maybe you'd get the ending we got in the game, since that's how the Parasite Scorn guy sees everyone. But maybe if you free him, maybe if there's more options in this area that would far more compassionately help Moldman, they could have gotten a different ending, a better ending, on top of all the other choices, moral and just branching, that I think should have been in the rest of the game. It is very easy to sit here and balk at the decisions the developers made. I'm not the one creating a video game. I don't have to program or model any of this. But at the same time, when the game has been in development for 8 years, one would expect there to be something more expansive, especially when the community manager or marketer or whoever is telling people about all the how moral choices affect your achievement completions and the game itself. Part of the problem is they rebuilt the game from the ground up at least twice. There's the 2014 era of Scorn, the 2016 to 17 era of Scorn, and then the version of Scorn that we're seeing now. So it isn't like they had all 8 years to work on more than just the game. It was actually rather fractured on top of the limited developer numbers that only increased as the years went on. Still, it would have been nice to have just a bit more in regards to this feature that the developers wanted people to know about. If they ever do work on the game some more, either through DLC or maybe just patching stuff and adding things like No Man's Sky did, I would hope that at least one thing they add is more to this area, or how it affects something later on when you come back to it. The elevator here actually represents a rather major part of game design in Scorn. The inability a lot of the times to backtrack. For certain areas, when you go up an elevator, do a thing, and go back down, you're unable to return to the elevator and go up again. You're done. You've completed that area of the game, and it's going to be locked off from you. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. It ensures that the player is always moving forward and doesn't get lost backtracking to places he doesn't need to go. And for areas with combat and actual losing conditions, like the crater, that can definitely be welcome so you don't risk dying even more. This area also presents the very first elements of sexuality, as you can see. Hordes of dead bodies piled on top of each other, coming out of this massive, weird structure. However, this will be the last sexual elements that you see until you reach the city of Polis. Everything else is rather tame in comparison, or full of things of you seeing sexual elements, but it's not really there. One of the things that's often missing in games inspired by Giger is sexual elements. The man drew sex. He drew a lot of erotic works mixed in with his own brand of visual horror. So I think many people do appreciate there being actual sexual elements in Scorn. It's not just going for the ribbed tubing or biomechanical aesthetic. It is trying to embrace the themes and ideas found in Giger's work. And this might just be a little palate cleanser or something to say, hey, there will be sex. It may not be for a while, but it is there. So just work with us and finish the game and to the point where you start to see it more. On another level, it does represent a break from the norm of the video game industry. For whatever reason, gross violence and mutilation are perfectly fine. You'll get slapped with an M rating and sometimes even a T. But sex, that's a tricky subject and more liable to land you an adults-only rating. The kind of activities that we're discouraged from doing. Shooting people, stabbing people, setting them on fire, that's for the store shelves. But the kind of activity that's honestly in of itself a victimless thing, the act of sex is neither moral or immoral, it's just a biological function, That can land your game an AO rating, or adults only, and prevent it from being on the shelves at GameStop or online storefronts like Xboxes or PlayStation. Steam really is the only haven for these adult-only games, and even then it's a question of how long that will be. If Scorn was better received at launch, I would imagine it would have led to more and more game designers being more and more bold with this stuff, until the ESRB Jannies realize that maybe their rules are too arbitrary to continue following. Then again, they are the people who take a look at actual gambling in games and say, no, it's not gambling because it's not literally a casino. Personally, I think they should just ditch the ESRB Jannies entirely. A game has a list of here's all of the, elements that aren't suitable for children, and then let players decide if that's too mature or not mature enough for their enjoyment. Now in this section here, we get the first taste of combat, and therefore the first area where there's an actual losing condition. It's not challenging at all, other than the rather short and pathetic length that your piston gun can fire at. Most of these flying drones here are content to just wait in place for minutes at a time, spraying these meat pillars with mist that you can then walk up to and give them a poke. This is an alright element of game design. It lets players understand what the tool can do and how it functions without throwing them into the meat grinder and risking them dying and becoming overly frustrated. You can still die here, and I think many players have probably taken damage from running through the spray before realizing that you can't just sprint through this area with impunity. There is also the cleverness of the fact that you have to send these drones out twice. So maybe you go through this meat pillar area, defeating all of the flying drones, go to the other side and activate that side's flying drone, but realize, hey, I don't have to do this combat. I can just go back in the direction I went in the first time and not risk getting hurt. There's actually quite a lot of moments like that in Scorn, being able to avoid a fight, which I actually quite like because it adds an element of different gameplay. You can be the shooty McBadass kill everyone guy, or you can try play more strategically and only pick the fights that you know you can win or absolutely have to. Scorn is a rather linear and restrictive game, but having the option of different play styles, I think, is almost always welcome in any game. This is unfortunately an element that I think many gamers missed out, and the chief cause for all the criticisms of the game's combat, but I'll be getting to that later. Visually, the game is incredible. It looks fantastic. There's a lot of details in the environment. And I absolutely love the fact that even with the same asset, there's slight variations in the textures. I think that in the future, more than graphical fidelity, having these variations even in the same thing will become more and more important. All the trees should not look alike. In fact, if they all look different, all the better. I might have wasted a few $100 upgrading my PC to play the game though. In my previous build I had a 1060 and got a 3080, coincidentally and conveniently at the time when the cryptocurrency shitters were going through a massive recession. This isn't necessarily a bad thing though, because the point is the game actually runs remarkably well on a lot of systems, even ones that are below its minimal specs. The developers have said that they have not optimized the game for the Steam Deck, and yet it apparently runs on that machine perfectly well. You would think the fact that your game works, it functions, it doesn't crash, and there's no game-breaking bugs or glitches would be just a mandatory thing and not something to laud the developers over. But unfortunately, in this day and age of video gaming, where so many studios are like, screw it, we'll fix it in the day one patch over stuff that literally breaks a fucking game, yeah, it's worth pointing out when a game actually doesn't shit itself to death. Some people have reported seeing bugs or glitches before, but, I guess the old saying goes, it works on my machine. That's kind of one of the problems with game design, though. Even with the most railroaded game out there, if you have thousands of people playing, someone's going to get something fucky happening during their run. But overall, of all the things I think they should add in future patches and updates, stability does not seem to be one of them for me. This area here gives a look into how I think most of the puzzles in Scorn operates. They aren't these super intricate things you have to solve like the Mold Man puzzle getting him into the crane, but instead it's like the entire area there's a certain list of things you have to do, oftentimes the exact same thing just in different locations, in order to make the area do the thing that allows you to move forward. This and sending out the drones is a look into that. And where the drones, you do have some different options in how you progress further, being able to choose if you fight or not. With this, it is mandatory that you do all the steps. And if this asshole would have just dropped down like 4 feet onto the floor, we could have had a much better ending for the main character. Just want to point that out. One criticism of Scorn is the amount of invisible walls present. There's a lot of areas you just can't access even when there's no railing to stop you. You can't walk off of edges of cliffs and fall to your death. You can't move over certain bodies or piles of rubble, even though even a small child would be able to navigate that. Scorn Guy is simply not as athletic enough to step over a particularly large rock. A lot of this comes from the misplaced perception that Scorn is going to be an action-y shooter game. The fact that your character can't even jump or crawl definitely limits his mobility, and the one thing your character can do besides walk, run, isn't that much faster than his walking speed to begin with. However, for a game that likes to pride itself on its environmental storytelling and immersion, there's almost nothing less immersive in a video game, barring bugs and glitches, than seeing something that makes you say, I can step over that, why can't you? Still, I don't see this as much of a problem. Once you accept the fact that there are certain elevations that your character just isn't going to be able to move over, you start to play through the game, finding less and less of these invisible walls because you're not intentionally running into them. There's really only been a few times during my playthrough where I felt like I was unfairly caught on some invisible wall architecture. The prologue ends with you grabbing the final battery piece with a flying drone and inserting it into the central meat pillar. There is a small detail in the animation where the first two batteries were inserted without issue, but the third one had a slight bump to it. It wasn't inserted properly the first time, and it's a question of, is that what caused this whole area to basically explode? Or was it just extremely unstable to begin with and you just put in one battery too many? After all, it doesn't look like anything has actually been in here alive for a long time. Despite it being this facility with multiple different consoles and stuff that requires multiple different Scorn people to operate, you're the only one there, and Mold Man certainly isn't in this room to help you either. With a single action, you seal your character's fate and the fate of the character you'll eventually play as. Vast amounts of white liquid that everyone jokes as being cum, flies out of the central pillar and effectively drowns you. And again, it's a question. Did this cause you to become the parasite, or did this do something that eventually released the parasite from something else? This isn't supposed to be a lore discussion video. I'd like to make those later on, but it is worth talking about here because one goal of the game is to get players to conversate about the lore and nature of its story. But with the prologue's end, we then get into the main game, and we then see through the eyes of our main character, another entity quite literally being born, something that seems to happen a lot in Scorn's world. It seems to be a recurring theme, that of birth, life, sex, death, all of those very pretentious philosophical matters. What a cutscene is and isn't might vary depending on the person, but I'm of the view that if there's a sequence in the game where your character is moving around and doing stuff, but you have no option of controlling it, it is or should be considered a cutscene. It effectively is one, even if it is taking place within the game itself. Another element of odd cruelty is introduced into the game's universe. With your character's birth, he's basically shoved out of a wall and falls down on the hard surface below. There is no caring birth in Scorn, there's just pain and suffering. In a fall like that, it's very likely that many others did not survive that fall. The very brief moment they're alive and conscious ends when their head hits the ground. Our character is lucky, unlucky, depending on how you look at it, to have not died then and there. He pulls out the umbilical cord and is ready to start his adventure. We've seen only brief glimpses at this area. We didn't get any extended gameplay showcasing the outside world, so this might be the most fascinating area to people first starting the game who have watched the trailers and promotional materials beforehand. At least the most fascinating so far. And it really does give you a sense of the scale and perspective that comes with a world like Scorn. That is a massive wall. There's a ton of these birthing pods on it. And does fill me with a little bit of satisfaction to say that I was right about Scorn people growing out of walls. The only problem is that, the material I used as a basis for that was incorrect. The concept art that I saw was actually in relation to the parasite, and yet somehow I was still overall correct. I used a different formula and got the right answer, so to say. For people like me who were genuinely interested in the game's story and lore and were actively trying to figure it out, that is one of the things that's best about the game. But it's also something that the overwhelming majority of gamers are just not going to have or appreciate because they just weren't as interested in the lore and story of Scorn as we are. I can't really hold it against them that they might have had a slightly less positive view than me because they didn't have that element of intrigue, however it's pronounced. But at the same time, I don't think they should hold it on me that I might give the game a better review than they would because of the bias of actively wanting to know and understand the game's world. After all, it could have been entirely possible that the lore ended up being boring and just too confusing to make heads or tails out of, thus frustrating and thus ruining that as well. One thing that I'm not particularly partial on is the color of the thick haze surrounding everything. I do kind of prefer the 2017 and earlier build of the game where it was a yellow or orange haze. In fact, all of the concept art, it's a yellow and orange haze, which is another example of making me wonder of what was different. What did we potentially miss out of due to the passage of time, the restarting of development, the additional funding, and the changing of developer opinions and philosophies. In retrospect, this section of the game here, the outside, is perhaps the easiest in all of Scorn. It's quite literally a path from point A to point B, and being a linear game where your character is about as athletic as Stephen Hawking, there's no opportunity to veer from that path. One thing I do again have to ask is, why is this where there's other Scorn people but not in any of the factories or facilities? You have multiple rotting corpses here, but in the actual crater area, in the place where you would expect there to be a lot of Scorn people who died churning away at their tasks, at some point that's no longer there. Where the bears begin, the Scorn people end. These shots do have one nice benefit of being able to see a fuller view of your character. You understand that these are the same species as you, the same type of Scorn person as you, and you get a look at their faces, missing eyes and skin as they might be. This is the only real view you get of your character until the end of the game at Paulus. The reason I mention this is because throughout the development of Scorn in all its years, the developers were incredibly secretive. Hell, all of the achievements in Scorn are secret achievements. You can't look at them just by clicking the achievement list by your copy of Scorn. Though you can if you have the look at the global achievements, but that's more of a Steam thing than a developer-intended thing. And the very look of our character has also remained a large mystery. Yes, we can look down at him in first person in the 2017 demo, and there is concept art showing him from a side view and back view, but just a straight up facial look at Scorn Guy has been hidden from us for, most of the game's development. And then when we do see the face of a Scorn person, it comes a question of, well, this one doesn't have any skin or has like some rotting texture, so maybe our guy looks different. And is this even actually our Scorn guy or just a Scorn citizen of its world? This really is just something people like me and maybe the fan artists care about, being able to know what your character looks like, either to analyze lore or to draw him in whatever situation people like to draw him in. I've noticed it's usually erotic. But the secrecy might have come as a hindrance to the developers because one of the greatest criticisms of Scorn, I think one of the most valid, is its length and all of the cut content. People genuinely expected more, and because the developers held their cards so close to their chest, they had no real idea that the game would be so short and so bereft of areas to explore. And it is a short game. I beat it in 6 hours and 40 minutes, and you can see I took my time to look around. I played the slow strats during the combat section of just waiting for the creatures to move by and despawn. I'll get into that later. And I still beat it in just a little over the minimum predicted time for the game. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with a game being short. There's plenty of smaller games out there that are genuinely great experiences. You can go through Journey in like an hour and a half, and I really enjoy and love that game. However, a problem people have is the game's price. $40 for what might not even be 4 hours. That seems a bit lopsided, and I have to agree. Even with inflation and stuff, that seems like way too high of a cost for a game that first of all is so short, and second of all has already received so much funding for its development. One of the criticisms that's often thrown at Scorn that I don't agree with is that it's a walking simulator. I think that term is used far too often and would be better stricken from the gamer lexicon than to continue to be used and abused. I suppose there are some differences or differing opinions in what people regard as a walking simulator, Maybe if you can't jump or do any platforming at all, it's automatically one to you. But my view of a walking simulator is one that has no losing condition. One that has no puzzles you can even lose to. Scorn does have puzzles that, if you're unable to solve them, you can't go forward. A game like Journey does not. It's so simple that it seems almost impossible for you not to be able to solve the puzzles. A walking simulator is one that has no losing condition. You can't die and the game tells you you need to go through this area again. A game like Journey doesn't have that. Even when you get hit by the enemies in the game, if you lose enough health, they just disappear. They don't attack you anymore. You're allowed to move forward, though a little bit hindered in how far you can jump. Scorn is not that. There are enemies. They can kill you. They can send you back to a checkpoint. This, in turn, again brings up the issue of people not really understanding what a survival horror really is. Scorn is in many ways like the early Resident Evil games. You walk around an area, you shoot enemies occasionally, you're extremely likely to get killed in a direct confrontation, so trying to be Doomslayer in Scorn or the Wesker Mansion is not advisable. And you solve puzzles in order to unlock more areas to walk around. It's not a difficult concept, and yet for whatever reason, so many people had a fundamental misunderstanding of what the game is. A source of negative reviews, and though I do think it is a little bit unfair to say that all of the negative reviews are from people who just didn't like the game for what it was, and didn't appreciate its objective qualities because it wasn't something like Call of Duty or Doom Eternal, I do have to admit that a lot of them likely are because of instances like that. With how often FIFA ends up selling incredibly well year after year despite being the same game, I'm just gonna say it, gamers as a collective aren't particularly bright. Despite my criticisms of the aesthetics of the fog and haze in this area, I will say that it does do a good job delivering a distinctively alien look. The art book seems to imply that Scorn takes place on Earth and Scorn people are humans. Some people think that's a far future of humanity. I think if that's a case, and it's a humanity that has undergone a completely different history than what we have now. But you would be forgiven for thinking it does take place on an alien environment. The game uses not just Giger and Beksinski's aesthetics quite well, but also delivers on its own merit the small changes that they made to the biomechanical concept. A large part of this is due to scale. Big things seem more outworldly and alien. Something that's larger than life really makes you wonder what went down here. How did it get to this point? If it was just some small enclosed space, just a tiny building, it wouldn't generate that much mystique and awe. But because Scorn tends to have really huge structures, some of which you can't even access but you can see are there, it makes you think that the world is much larger than it actually is. If you just had only the ground that you're able to walk on, you would find that the game is a lot smaller than what you might think just looking around at all the architecture. That's not necessarily a negative thing. Lots of games do that. It's a clever developer design trick in order to really make your game seem larger than life without having to have the issue of players going to these areas that don't really matter and don't contribute to anything and then getting frustrated when they've basically wasted their time. The thing I also like about this is just being able to see some context for some of the clips and shots that were shown off in the 2022 trailers. the, release date trailer, the Doug Bradley trailer, just being able to finally know how these short clips fit together. Again, this is something that people like me only really care about, and if you're just a casual player who didn't enjoy the game, and part of that was because you didn't have that connection with it, that's perfectly fine. I will say what did kind of disappoint me is that this is the only meat pillar room you see. I could swear the developers have said that there's more than one of those rooms, but this is the only one you come across, and so when looking at pictures and clips of rooms with these meat pillars in them, I was having a completely skewed view of what I should be focusing on and talking about. I'm not against being wrong about my analysis in a video game. There's definitely a lot of things in my previous theory videos that just turned out to be incorrect. However, I am not a fan of, the developers saying there's going to be one thing, and then it not being the case, or only being the case of a technicality, harkening back to that issue of playing through the game multiple times for achievements and moral choices. It is, however, I will say, cool to see the room in such a state of disrepair, and it's pretty clear that whatever happened here a long time ago. The architecture is even more withered than previously thought. You also get a view of the parasite just kind of tapping the wall, inviting you. Maybe you can interpret it as being somewhat seductive, but I kind of interpret it as how a cat would sometimes tap their tail when getting ready to pounce. This, however, is a fake out. It's not time to confront that guy yet. Another detail I like is the fact that if you look down at the piles of dried cum, you don't see the first Scorn protagonist. He's not there. And one would expect to see at least an arm sticking out or leg, some indication of that. A hint of what really happened to the person we played as previously. The developers have said that there will be some instance of backtracking, going back to places you've been before. In some ways, I think that's true on a technical level. You do backtrack in the different areas when you do a thing and need to go back and pull a lever or whatever. But it is also the case here, and it's kind of unfortunate that, if the game was bigger, you could have had a little bit more of that, seeing just a little bit more of the world in a different state compared to how you saw it the first time. And this is another instance of me being kind of tripped up about whether or not there are multiple places like this. I kind of assumed there'd be two different areas with that large heart structure, but it turns out it's the same one after passage of time. Though I'm not as upset about that as I am about the meat pillar room, because the developers never said there'd be more than one of those. This area seems to once again introduce a sort of brute force nature progression in Scorn. There's only so many places you can go, and so you're going to have to figure out just what's a detail you missed, and then what you can do with that detail. In this case, I'm trying to find a seemingly random corpse of a dead Scorn guy, highlighted only when I get near him. I grab the key, and now I'm able to progress. We get the first puzzle with the main character, not the prologue character, and this one is kind of interesting because I thought this would be like those minigames where one of the rings rotates individually, but another one, it could cause a different one to rotate, so you have to figure out which ring to move at what time would cause them all to line up properly. Instead, this introduces the fact that you're trying to clamp down on these little holes here and then move them all together to the top. Now, this one has basically no losing condition. It introduces a concept, but the later ones up the ante a little bit. It's not really significant to point that out. That's fundamental puzzle design. If you're doing the same thing again, the thing you're doing again needs to be a little bit harder to keep it challenging and engaging. You see this not just with later puzzles, but also with the boss fight near the end of the game. This, I think, is the only instance where you see really harsh colored lighting in the game outside of the cutscene where your character falls from the wall. And maybe there's one of these pillars in the crater that also has red lights, but doesn't coat the surrounding area in a vibrant red light like it does here. That's just a small thing I've noticed. Like, there were some pretty harsh reds in the 2014 trailer that are completely absent from the final build. Now, I'm someone who really likes, harsh colored lights. I like seeing bathed in something that isn't white or yellow. Alright, that mainly sounds very, very weird. But, it's not really a criticism of the game that doesn't have a lot of that. It's just me pointing out that I like this room because I really like vibrant reds. One rather interesting detail about the elevator here is that there is a little stand right there, that is actually unusable. It's not broken in the game's world, but you can't access it because the elevator is up. And I guess I should play through this area again and see if that changes if the elevator is on the ground floor, because that could actually be a very interesting environmental detail if when the elevator is on the ground you can use that console to bring it back up again. Now, these pipes confuse the hell out of me because I couldn't imagine what they transported. I thought it was just bodies, being sucked and sent around, which didn't make sense to have such gnarly holes in them that stuff could fall out of or limbs could get caught into. And it couldn't have been gas or fluid because, again, there's such large holes in it. This kind of does illustrate how different intricate or just how much more context you get when you're able to get up close to something. We now know that these pipes are just walkways for Scorn people, ones that are able to walk. We also get a view of the final version of the tunnels that we saw in the 2016 trailer, and unfortunately they're not as vibrant as they were in that trailer. I kind of prefer the old, very fleshy versions that we saw. The internal area is also different from a concept art we saw where there was actively fluids, dropping and splashing around down there. It's just a lot more dry and a lot more desaturated. The different branching paths in this area, not very expansive as they may be, does lead to a bit of interesting sequence issues, because I then run down here and come across a room with one of the standard consoles and a dead Scorn guy in it. You need the wrist key to access a console, and he doesn't have it. Likely to ensure there's no questions of, well, why doesn't he just do what he did with Moldman, the first guy, and stick his arm in? Although it does come to question, what was that dead Scorn person trying to do in the first place? They perhaps could have solved this by just having his wrist key be visibly broken. It's unable to be used. This does mean that you will have to venture off into a previous territory, or venture off and then come back to that area again. Some people might find that just a little bit frustrating, but it's a puzzle exploration game. with, some branching paths, it's almost expected that such a thing will occur. What I do like is that as you unlock more of those like circular puzzles, more of those like seeds come down. It eventually clicks that, oh, this is somehow tied to what I need to do here in order to make everything function and progress. There's this additional room here with another one of these flower pot areas that's noticeably more dead, and almost it's like this is confirmation but also trickery of what those flower pots have. You see like a dead Scorn person in it, and actually they do grow Scorn people, as we'll see later, but not that kind of Scorn person. That's like a Scorn guy grow out of the wall kind of Scorn person, just haphazardly laying down in the pod, which kind of makes me wonder, like, how did he get there? What was he doing when he did die? Though there are some corpses in this facility, That was my phone ringing. Anyways, there are corpses in the facility, but it still seems like there's not enough for such a massive facility. The ones that were clogging that tunnel were mold people, not Scorn guys. A nice little visual cue here is that, like, the individual blades stop spinning when you remove these. It makes sense in universe they would all be together, although it does come to question, like, why they would have something where you need 3 of them to stop the whole fan. Why not just have one do the job? You also see the white liquid there, which makes me think it is like a power source, maybe some kind of hydraulic system. And here you see the parasite. Now, in one of the trailers, I mentioned that fan you see over him as being possibly the fan that Scorn guy stopped earlier. So that's another instance of, I was kind of right, you're in the area, you see the fan there, but it's a different one. I like how you can see the kind of biomass covering his face. It's a little bit transparent. An indication that it's there, but it's not really going to ruin your HUD or anything like that. And it is a rather, it's basically the closest thing to a jump scare you get in the game. Like, it's an abrupt sequence, and it caught me by surprise because I was thinking of the wrong fan when it happened. But this becomes kind of the dual protagonist that you face the rest of the game with. You and Scorn Guy number 1, who's now this parasitic creature. Of course, it's a pretty one-sided relationship. That thing painfully digs into your chest, and what you get out of it is it sometimes holds objects. Something that probably could have been accomplished if Scorn Society invented pockets. This look for Scorn Guy is definitely something they really wanted to keep secret. They didn't look down in the 2020 gameplay trailer, I don't think. And for the 2017 one and demo, they just removed the arms but left the gashes inside. You do see the extra pair of arms in, like, some of the 2020 trailers when healing or reloading. So people did, like, understand that Scorn Guy has more than one arm. Although, like, the way they set it up, it kind of looks like he had 3 arms and not 4. This is in part due to their dedication to immersion. They want to make sure that your character is actually holding items and not just it spawns in randomly from hammer space as it is in a lot of other video games and cartoons. However, I think the arms only show them holding something when you're nearby something that uses it. Like, it's not going to hold that kind of puzzle item if you're not by the puzzle item. And a lot of the times when you look down, it doesn't even hold up the door key that you'll get later. I mentioned before that the animation for getting the wrist key is different every time, and you're gonna see it here where there's just one of these devices sort of randomly placed in the facility, and even though he's trying to tug away at it, it's not quite as severe as the first Scorn guy did. And what some people have pointed out is that when you get the wrist key as Scorn Guy, it starts bleeding and it's super painful, but when you get the wrist key as they're called the shells, I think, those like pregnant looking statue things, they don't tug away at all. In fact, their animation is both like the same from what I've seen, almost as if the wrist keys are meant for them and not for people like Scorn Guy. I'm not too convinced by this simply because this seems to happen in an industrial area, and the only corpses and bodies we see are either Scorn Guy's people or mold people. We don't see the shells anywhere, and in order to use those shells, they seem to be almost like robots or automatons that you can directly link your consciousness to, and there's no infrastructure in this area that would allow you to do that. And yet, this is where all the wrist keys are. I think they're just built of stronger stuff. Maybe they don't really have blood coursing through their arms like Scorn Guy does. And the fact that, they don't feel any pain, it's entirely possible that they have no nerve receptors in their arms. But there's me, just talking about Scorn theories again. Here you spray this acid in these tunnels, and you're meant to spray it on the pile of mold people, and it is a nice little detail that the bodies there are actually pretty green. It dissolves them, but what this tells me is that, this is such a common occurrence that just corpses pile up in the tunnels, preventing people from being able to get across, that they've added this system to it. Either that, or they deliberately pile corpses there and spray them so that the acid then dips down into the central area. And maybe that's what was the initial plan for this. You have to fill up the area a little bit in order to make it work. I really would like to just do a Q&A with one of the developers at some point to get a better idea of what's changed throughout development of the game, because there are still a lot of unknowns about what they've decided to do with the story, with different areas and stuff like that. There is Megna, the community manager, but it doesn't seem like he has full access to all of the Scorn knowledge himself. Plus, he was brought on board in late 2021. Or actually, I think he might have been brought on board in 2022. And so that's most of the game's developmental history that he just wasn't there for or had proper access to. And so yeah, this little segment is basically just following the classic game design of you've done something that changes the environment a little bit to allow you to access a new area. It also gives you another view of the meat pillar room. I think this is one specifically from one of the pictures I was analyzing. And again, I am just a little bit disappointed that I was led to believe there'd be more of these rooms, and there's just that one. This is a final version of that puzzle. You can see half of it is covered up to prevent you from seeing where the spinning part and your part are, but you can actually tell by sound cue or by just putting it in a slot, trying to activate it every time it stops or looks like it stops. And if that doesn't work, then try another slot and so on. You can play this puzzle intelligently, or you can just brute force it. Both are viable options and lead to the same outcome. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's actually to a benefit if there is an option to kind of brute force a puzzle rather than being having to solve it exactly as the developers intend you to, with exactly the thought process they intended you to have. And then we get like another puzzle, and I actually quite like this one. I like these kind of puzzles where you're supposed to rotate this so that when it goes down, you're able to push it further in. And then you need to do that for like these other lights reaching the red area. You can see on the screen here how to solve it. It's just a fun puzzle. I enjoyed it. And it also activates everything here and opens flower pods. You're not able to access the stuff in the center there without solving that puzzle, but first you can see that there's Scorn people growing out of these pods, but they have that like third eye on their head. I thought these guys grew out of walls because of one of the concept arts showed him kind of growing out of a wall, and again, while it's something that I was technically right about in general for Scorn people, for this particular variation, they grow out of these pod things. Which is interesting to think that, like, we've seen 3-ish different reproduction methods in the game. Again, that's a pretty big theme. You can't destroy the pods, unfortunately. That would have been kind of funny. And can see they all have their own, like, key and coral next to them. So it's almost like they were supposed to be grown and then given this stuff. They were supposed to be the ones with the luxury of using it. So it almost makes me wonder, like, were they supposed to get the wrist keys? Because we never play as them or see that variant get it. Now for this, if you don't solve all the puzzles, there's actually a little animation of him tugging on the key and not being able to get it. But back to what I was saying before, you don't actually see these guys walking around. This is the most movement you're gonna get from them. And so it could be that they are like workers who were intended to get the wrist key and Scorn Guy wasn't. Maybe there's some other thing he's supposed to be or do. Hell, maybe he's supposed to be grounded down into raw resources, much like the mold people. Another thing I was wrong about is the fact that I kind of assume that the bears and kiwis and stuff grow out of them, and that's because in one picture, in one area of a later part of the game, you do see what looks like a, foot or leg of one of the bears poking out of it. I was right that these are intrinsically linked to the healing coral, though. Like, the red fluid in the healing coral is probably the same as what they're gestating in, and it is a vitalizing, life-giving fluid. And later we'll see it's also linked in many ways to the pregnant woman statues and the shells. Like, the healing juice is very important in the culture of Scorn. So now you get like a key, and you can see there's like lights on it. One is lit, so that's like the lowest stage of key. I kind of assumed there would be like different lighting patterns, like it's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but like maybe 3 lights are lit in one part of the key, and then in order to access an area, you need to like switch around so that the 3 lights are in a different part of the key. That would have contributed to more of a maze-like gameplay than what we've gotten, where basically it's just a hard stop until you're able to find the upgrade station, and then you're allowed to progress on. I do like that you're able to go back to the Mold Man station, although it's much more difficult to see what's going on. And I think the ability to go on that walkway has been blocked off. Like, you're unable to go to where the first big puzzle is located. I'll have to play through again to really see, but it looks like it's kind of blocked off there, so that might actually be the case, which is a bit unfortunate because it would be nice to see more of like the decay of time that happened here. Now this is basically you going backwards throughout the prologue, which I actually think is pretty interesting. Seeing some of the stuff that was just completely inaccessible being accessible. And you do kind of get the idea that will happen because there are those doors. This is also the first time that the parasite arm hurts you, and every time they do, it does take away a bar of your health. That I'm a little bit conflicted on, because like gameplay-wise, especially when it comes to combat, what happens when you have 1 bar of health, no healing juice, and the scripted parasite arm attack happens? Is that just gonna kill you? That seems like it could literally soft lock your game. You're unable to progress. You have to restart a checkpoint because of a scripted event. But at the same time, it does add like an element of urgency and resource managing to the game. You should have at least 2 bars of health, and you should make sure you're using your healing items accordingly. Maybe not too much in the event that you get into conflict and take damage and aren't able to heal. And it is also fitting for the cruel nature of the parasite in Scorn's world at large. This is the first machine that gives you some healing juice in general. It is pretty clever that like there's a scripted event that hurts you, here's how you can get your health back. But like, smart gamers are probably not going to heal at that time because hey, it's just 1 bar of health. How much does a healing juice heal? Turns out it heals 2 bars of health, so I was actually being clever here, waiting before using the healing juice, cause that means I didn't waste it. In this part here, I was like really desperately like trying to use my eyes to see where Mold Man was. I mean, I wouldn't even have minded at that point if I just saw his corpse lying around. But you can see how like whether you kill him or free him, you can't even really see the door behind the console area. You can't see where Mold Man is or what he's gone up to. You can barely see the area at all. It's a moral choice for the sake of an achievement, and that's basically it. An achievement that's at the very beginning of the game. I suppose the saving grace is that since it is at the beginning of the game, achievement hunters don't have to waste their time playing through the whole game again in order to make a moral choice that quite frankly just doesn't really matter. So when I say you're working backwards, I really do mean you're working backwards. Like, it's kind of funny because in the fields you start out at basically the very beginning of where the prologue took place, and then you move away to like the end of the prologue area, and now you're making your way as close back to the beginning as you can. In fact, you're going back not to where the cutscene happened, but where the first elements of gameplay happened. I do wonder like about how the pink haze has basically taken over this whole facility. Like, what exactly is it? Fog? Dust? Once a roof is open, it basically engulfs everything inside. Maybe it's rather corrosive. Maybe it's something that is very good at eroding away at structures and technology. Yet it doesn't seem to affect Scorn Guy much, despite what one of the concept arts from 2014 kind of implied. Now, this might have been one of my favorite moments when playing through the game from a subjective standpoint. Like I've said, I've been following this game for quite a while. I first learned about it in 2016, and it's the first and so far only Kickstarter product that I've backed. So, yeah, I get on this elevator here, and I do the thing to activate the thing after kind of looking around it for a little bit just to take in the details. I activate this little console thing, not knowing what's ahead of me. You know, is it going to be the 2020 area? Could it be Paulus? Could it be something completely new? Had no idea. Door finally opens. I walk out, and I instantly recognize this is the start of the 2017 demo. I recognize this room. I recognize that frontal door, the pathway over there, and I recognize the pathway that would have led me to looking over the bridge. That was such an incredible moment for me, because I really did wonder how much this place has changed given all of the development that happened since it came out. Like, I could practically play through the 2017 area in my sleep. Now, this was actually different. That, additional hallway there wasn't in the 2017 area. And you'll notice there's no wall or console with a button here that was presumably going to serve some purpose in the previous build. It's definitely one of those things that really makes me wonder what the game would have been like. Because if you remember in the trailer for the 2017 area, there wasn't anything covering that button here. There was no red flesh over it like there was in the demo. So presumably you would have been able to use that for some kind of purpose. They've also added in these huge meadow spheres here that were completely absent in both trailer and demo. Now, not only did this fill me with a bit of sense of nostalgia and stuff, but also filled me with a little bit of a sense of dread, because in previous areas, there were no real losing conditions. There weren't any enemies to contend with. The parasite is a scripted moment. Moldman certainly isn't going to do anything to you. And you're just backtracking through all of the places you've been before, but I know that there are bears in the 2017 area. There's kiwis in the 2017 area. There's ceiling penises in the 2017 area. There's those flying head guys in the 2017 area. Oh, and here's one of the consoles you use to upgrade your key. So I knew there were enemies, I knew there was combat, but do you know what was in the 2017 area that I don't have right now? A gun. I do not get a long-ranged weapon. I'm still stuck with this piston thing, and so if I want to go anywhere and do anything, I kind of have to, do melee combat, and I know how crappy this weapon can be at doing just about anything. You get 2 short-range hits, and then that's it for a few seconds. I see like a creature over there walking around, and my instinct here was actually just like stop and look to see what it does. And that's where I discovered that, combat isn't necessarily mandatory for this area. There's a lot of people who heavily criticize the combat for being too difficult. Your weapons don't have enough ammo, the creatures take too many hits, it's too easy to die. So here's some great advice that I can give you. The overwhelming majority of combat encounters are optional. Like, if you just wait, they'll tend to run in or walk or shamble over to a hole or a pile of meat and despawn when they're out of view and they don't spawn back. Or alternatively, you can just run past them, which can be difficult given that the enemy hitboxes are able to be caught up in, and there has been at least one time I've died due to that. But the point is that you don't have to fight everything. This was actually hinted at in the Doug Bradley trailer when he said that this horrible fauna here wants nothing more than to be just left alone. And if you leave it alone, it's not going to come for you, much like a real-world animal. I know it seems a bit weird to praise a game for basically letting you skip a major aspect of its gameplay. Scorn isn't a shooter, but there is shooting in it, and there's 3 areas, distinct areas in my view, that have these bears and kiwis and stuff. But it does opt for, different play styles, which is great in just about any game. And it also rewards players for being, observant and calm and collected. Rather than rushing into things head on and trying to fight everything that moves, if you notice this pattern, if you figure out this secret, the game becomes significantly easier. You're rewarded for being observant. You're rewarded for analyzing the environment and trying to figure it out. Of course, for this guy here, I had to do a little bit of ring around the rosy in order to get the occasional poke in on him. And I was also very happy to see that there was still collision. You can kick around the bears here. That's something I really like to do in the 2017 demo. I couldn't do it to any of the bodies in the previous area, so I thought that was just removed. Nope, it's here. It's back. You can kick bears around. How magical. So just a little, confession from me. I'm not good at video games, and I don't play a lot of horror games, so scary stuff isn't something I'm super used to in the scene of gaming. But this trick of mine really did make this whole next part of the game significantly easier, and it's a shame that more people didn't figure this out, because I think a lot of the negative reviews wouldn't be there if people knew about this strategy of just wait, watch, they'll go away, they'll despawn, and then you can go up and do the thing. This area has a significant green haze compared both to it in 2017 and I would say this shot from one of the 2022 trailers. That's something that's also in the next kind of area part. It's not in Paulus, it is in the meat pillar room. We don't really know what the haze is, but for whatever reason it's there. At some time between 2017 and the game's release, devs took a firm pro-fog stance in game design. It does add an air of abandonment and mystery to the area, but also kind of prevents you from being able to properly see what's far away and what stuff is upcoming. You kind of lose out on being able to see all the small details in the distance. Because I didn't know this was in the 2017 area, there's some structure on the ceiling to the side that was pretty prominent in the 2017 demo that I noticed in the corner of a clip from this area here and pointed it out, thinking that it was the thing appears twice in the game at least. And that's a recurring theme of just, I thought there would be more of this stuff in the game, more of this similar architecture, but there really isn't. It's just a revamped version of the original. The parasite attacks you here, and that's probably a bit of an oh shit moment for a lot of people because they've just gone through combat and being the first time, and with the piston thing, they probably lost quite a bit of health and are thinking, like, if this keeps happening, am I gonna be able to balance that properly? They did say that health and ammunition are very limited in the game, but because of the gameplay strategy I had, just letting the creatures fuck off and despawn before moving forward, I don't think there was, like, ever a time, except like twice, where I had any ammo issues. One was just, my fault for not checking. The other is an actual flaw about the gameplay that I'll talk about later. Oh, and here you'll be able to see the structure I was talking about right there. Now, the issues with the combat, in part, are because most gamers aren't like me, and we're asking, hey, is Doug Bradley bullshitting me, or do they really want to be left alone? But another part might be due to the game's general design philosophy, where no dialogue, no cutscenes, no text. In any other game, I can guarantee you, if it plays exactly like Scorn, but it has a voice protagonist, you might hear that person say, hey, something's over there. Maybe if I hang back a bit. Or there'd be a note saying, like, don't confront the creatures or try to avoid the creatures, something like that. Something that would prompt the player to not think he needs to pick a fight with everything that moves. You don't have that luxury in Scorn. You're going to have to figure it out for yourself, and that's something that I and a lot of gamers appreciate. As you can see here, that bear's just walking on by. He's gonna go into a despawn zone. No more bear. No more battles. I and a lot of other gamers appreciate, but I do know there's quite a few people who, if you introduce weapons in combat, they feel the need to, like, try to kill everything. Especially if when they notice you, they try to kill you. There really isn't a way to fix this, and it's not the fault of the devs that people didn't figure this out. It genuinely is a skill issue. Try paying closer attention and try not to act like this is Doom. And here is where I discovered that the 2017 gameplay trailer and the 2020 gameplay trailer take place basically in the exact same spot, which I kind of assume based on the fact they have the same enemies in both trailers. But it is still a little bit surprising to see, and so now I'm thinking about, the 2017 trailer and my time playing it, and the 2020 trailer, and how, like, this'll mesh together. By this point, I don't think there has been many sequence breaks other than the fact that I think accessing the bridge is different between builds. And it's not like I knew much about the pre-alpha area and how that would play out. So I was still thinking things are going to be followed relatively straight. Like, yeah, there's some new areas to access, but getting from point A to point B, you're gonna go through more or less the same hallways. So it was definitely a surprise when I discovered that the route that I took in the demos and the route that you take in the final game are completely different. And I'll talk about, like, some weaponry later on and how that's super different as well. Again, I don't have a pistol here, and there's no, like, lower area to grab the shotgun. That seems like an area that was changed around quite a bit, like, to avoid spoilers. The wrist key might not have been there in the final build, but earlier on, and something else would have been down there, and now I just really want to know what would have been down there, or in the shotgun room. Or is that where originally you got the shotgun and you got the pistol far earlier? What I find kind of interesting is for the very first few times that there's combat in the game, like the potential for combat, it's something your own character has done, like manipulating those huge circular doors or raising this, basically disturbing the wildlife. Uh, and then later on in the game, the creatures become more abundant, walking around and being actual potential enemies and not just background decoration. Until the room with the Crater Queen, that huge creature there, where they tend to be just walking around more often in general. Though even then, you are kind of doing stuff in the level that is disturbing everything. Finding health stations, especially for people who didn't know the good strat, is certainly a welcome thing, I think. It is nice that it does tend to stand out even among other biomechanical architecture. There's probably a lore reason why there's not so much healing juice at any given moment in them. It usually seems to be like the least amount they could provide. None of them are all the way filled, but from a gameplay perspective, it makes sense that it would be limited health. This is a horror game after all. You can see I kind of aggroed that Kiwi, and yet when I just backed up, he went away and despawned. And then I'm looking there, and I see that one bear kind of moving around a bit more than anyone else. And I'm thinking, if I go under there, what if that guy drops down and then starts attacking me? So, wanting to avoid the fight, I think, well, what's over here? And it turns out that this loops around to the other side. And so I'm able to avoid that potential conflict completely. And given that I still don't have a pistol, and this is a wide open area without any structures to do ring around the rosy strats with, that certainly is a nice thing to have available to you. Unfortunately, it's ruined by this guy here, and I just poke him and run away. And now that I look at it, it kind of looks like the area that was at the ending of the 2017 area. Now you can see I kind of shook a little bit there because it was a ceiling penis. And in the previous games or the previous builds, the ceiling penis had this direct line of sight attack where if you can see it, it can see you. Yeah, I think this is at the end of 2017 area. The architecture and layout is similar. It had a line of sight attack where your vision would become blurry and there'd be a bright light covering it, and if you stayed there, you die. But in the final build, they just shoot acid at you when you're far away and slap you when you're up close. And I think the reason for that is at some point in time, they've decided that you're not going to get the shotgun until close to the end of the game. Or not the shotgun, the grenade launcher close to the end of the game. And so they realize, well, if that's the case and we can't have an enemy that you literally can't look at in order to kill. I'm looking at right here and I'm just fine. It's not doing anything to me at the moment, though it will spit acid at me in a second or two. And so they had to kind of take away a rather unique attribute for one of the more unique enemies. Now it's just another thing that kind of spits at you from afar, which is just a little bit disappointing. In the 2017 build, you didn't have any means of attacking it. You only had the pistol, and you couldn't use that against it, but you were able to manipulate the environment in order to, make it go somewhere else. And in the 2020 trailer, you had the grenade launcher. It just seems like a really weird choice, and it has to be something they made pretty late on, because 2020 was when it still had the area of effect, attack. So I just wonder what the conversation was like. Why did they move the grenade launcher to the end of the game and then had to restructure basically the entire 2017 and 2020 areas and completely change the nature of the ceiling penises? It seems honestly like more work than just you have a grenade launcher when you start the boss fight. And on that note, the Kiwis also... Oh, here I see an ammo station, so I realized there's a gun nearby, and I was quite happy to have it. I decided to get the ammo first, so that I have, all the ammunition I need, because I don't know if you start out grabbing the pistol and it has ammunition in it. But I was quite happy to finally get my hands on some piece of ranged weaponry, because part of the reason that I was avoiding combat so much was simply because the piston weapon sucks for combat. However, I understood as a gamer that when they give you a new weapon, they tend to throw you into a trial to see how well you can use it. So I'm looking around with it raised, trying to see if there's any creatures that spawn, and this Kiwi here did. Now, the Kiwis are different than in 2017, because in that build, they, fill up this kind of sack with fluid, and then chuck that at you. But now it seems like they just spit something at you, though this isn't like a 2017 versus current build thing, like with the ceiling penis. This was something that was changed for the 2020 build of the game as well. So it's not really a fault of the final one, but still, that was a pretty unique attribute. It looked cool, it was interesting to play against, and it's just not in the game anymore. The Kiwis also take more hits in the 2020 to now build than it did in 2017. You used to be able to kill them in one shot. Now, you need two. I don't know how viable just shooting the legs of the creatures is right now. That was something you could do in the Kickstarter demo as a means to save ammunition, but here it seems almost more difficult to do so, and I genuinely haven't tested it out enough to know if it properly works. Here we see a puzzle that we're going to see again, and amusingly, this exact puzzle is not in the area that it was in the equivalent of that 2020 area. Before Scorn guy went into that kind of spherical cage and then rolled over to the area where the ceiling penis was. It's not there in this build, which kind of confuses me. It seems like they've restructured just so much. I wonder if part of the reason for delays is some last minute decisions. And then I wonder if some of the last minute decisions were the devs' way of keeping themselves secretive and not giving away too much information from the promotional material. Maybe that's a case, maybe not, but it is a possibility as far as I'm concerned. Interestingly enough, some people have actually reported that they missed the pistol, they never grabbed it, and their first ranged weapon was a shotgun. Now, I found it, kind of naturally, and I'm glad I found it, because the game would have been more difficult without it. But that is interesting that you can literally miss the, one of the main weapons in the game. Now, this actually is, to Scorn's credit, something that the marketing mentioned. It said the game won't be forgiving if you miss something important, like one of the weapons. So, that there is that challenge, and I guess it was right. It is possible to miss something important. It's not like the healing coral and key to open doors, that's just story mandatory. And there you have another example of just hanging back and letting them wander around working. But, like, the pistol can be missed. I think the shotgun might be in an area that you theoretically could ignore or just outright miss. The only mandatory weapons are the piston and the grenade launcher, and that's because they're tied to puzzles. I guess when they said Scorn is not a shooter, they meant it. You could theoretically beat the game without shooting anything. Even the boss fight, you could use a piston against. Well, I guess you do need to use a grenade launcher in, like, the third act of it. But that's, like, the only instance of actually needing to shoot an enemy. Theoretically, someone could even do a complete pacifist, except for those few times run, where you avoid shooting the creatures around you here. This is, I think, the hardest puzzle for me. It took me quite a while to figure out. I just edited the video to just skip that. And it was apparently kind of difficult for other people too. But it is, I think, that and the Mold Man one are the only really difficult puzzles I came across. Everything else was pretty easy. You can kind of brute force it a little bit, or you just need to really take your time and think. Here I get caught on the ceiling penis, so there's a example of being stuck on enemy hitboxes. I do seriously wonder about the amount of green though, cause like the meat pillar room was extremely green as well, to the point where even the outside area had a green haze that was, stronger than the purple haze that we saw in the opening cutscene. Maybe it's red meat that causes it, because the pillars had a lot of red meat on them, and there's, bears and all of their biological waste everywhere. But I just genuinely don't know. It's interesting that they would just have these particular colors for whenever there's some strong haze in the area. I guess if there's one criticism to have, it's that we've already seen an area with green haze. Maybe this could have been something else, like orange or yellow, since you're not using that for the outside. Or red, or blue. I want to say it kind of makes the environments look the same, but I also have to be fair to the game and acknowledge that this is the crater. This 2017 area, 2020 area, and the area with the crater queen are all defined by the devs as one particular area, so it does make sense in that case for it all to have a green haze. The whole crux of this 2017 area really is just getting one of these metal spheres from one part of the facility to another, having to go through the different hallways and bridges and stuff in order to accomplish that goal, which was quite different than how I imagined the area would be like. I thought it was more of a venture out and explore these different maze-like areas and just get from point A to point B. I'm not sure if I think it's like a bad thing that this is the case, because there still is a lot of exploration and does fit what they said about like an entire area effectively being one big puzzle. It's just different than what I initially assumed, but unlike some other stuff, I don't really think it's a bad thing. And I suppose that's a consequence of the previous trailers in general that were like very focused on just trying to survive moving around the facility rather than something like this. We did see these, claws and spheres and stuff in a Kickstarter update in I think it's like 2018 maybe. So it was added like after the 2017 build stuff, and I do wonder if it's just that build was unfinished or if this is an idea they had afterwards and decided to implement it. One of the reasons I think that if this does take place on Earth and it is like human beings, that they had a completely different history than we do is just the nature of the technology. Not just that it's biomechanical, though that certainly is telling, but just how analog everything is. It looks like the whole world is governed by levers and rope and hydraulics. There's no circuitry to be found. There's no digital things to be seen in Scorn. Even if we think about like a biological equivalent, say, neurons, we only see that at the absolute end, even though you would think that some digital architecture would work pretty well for facilities of production that we've seen so many times here. It is really kind of funny how this entire sequence is just to move a metal sphere around. And probably one reason why there aren't any like conventional computers or even Scornified versions of computers is theoretically with one you can then have just about everything handled from one spot. No going station to station, you just press different buttons or use different levers on the exact same console to achieve it. You kind of got that a little bit with the, well, not really, I was going to say the command center in the Prologue room, but that's just to change the tracks. It doesn't handle the crane, it doesn't handle the thing that puts that device on Moldman. It really makes me wonder if there was a bit more to the Prologue area that was eventually cut out. Not really sure what I'm looking at here. Maybe I'm just pointing out that looks like a shot from the 2020 trailer. I will definitely be talking about the 2020 Series X trailer at some point, because there is a lot to say about it and its relation to Scorn, or more accurately, how little of a relation it actually has. And actually, extremely abruptly, you're taken from the 2017 area straight to the 2020 area. Like, practically where one gameplay trailer ends, the other begins. We also get another Parasite moment, and this one isn't causing any physical deformities. I think this is the last one before Scorn Guy's body really starts changing. But it is another instance where you lose a bit of health, and this is right at the beginning of what's effectively, I like to think of, a separate area. The devs don't think of it as a separate area, it's still just the crater, and the fact that it has a pink haze or green haze everywhere indicates that. But because I was following the game for so long and analyzing the trailers so much, I really do kind of group this stuff based on, oh, this is from this segment of the previews we saw, and this is from this segment of the previews we saw. Now, I will say that because this area had the longest stretch of gameplay in the trailers and was the latest of the builds that we saw gameplay from, it probably is the least interesting part for me, both now and when I first play through the game. Simply because most of it I've seen before. Now, they do still throw some curveballs at us, but like a lot of this architecture and like, moments here and creature placement I have seen before, and it's not like the 2017 area where it's just so radically different, or the Prologue area that's even more radically different. And given that the architecture is so similar to the previous area, which again is kind of my bias, and I break this down based on trailer rather than the specific overall level area that the chapters and game files mention. But nonetheless, it is, I think, the least interesting area in the game, and it doesn't really help that these kind of pod things here are less interesting in this area than it was in the field area, because there you actually saw one open up and a Scorn person crawl out, while these are just kind of hanging around, and any that are on the ground with something inside, it's just a bunch of red fleshy mass. So here I see, I think it was a kiwi over there, and I decided to use my usual strategy of just avoiding the fight. Although it definitely took a while for the little guy to actually get up the ramp and then go to a different location in order for me to pass by. So this might be like one of the fights that it's best just to actually shoot something rather than play it safe or smart or however you want to put it. And see, we're some other level, but pretty much the same view of that big structure. And given that it's the most prominent thing in this look inside the giant crater, I think it's pretty natural to assume that that's where we're supposed to go. I do like how it kind of looks like the Crater Queen in a little, with some semblance, you know, how it kind of has this elongated head structure, and then there's a couple of big fingers wrapping around the crater, almost like it's a huge creature looking in. I forgot actually that that sphere doesn't move you anywhere. Trying to run through it, but it doesn't really matter one way or another. Now, I recalled from, see, you can't step over this, really? That's what I mean about the invisible walls, you know, sometimes actually being kind of dumb. Now, I remember from the previous trailer that around here is where you encounter the floppy bastards. There was one or two of their corpses in the 2017 area, which kind of put me on the edge, because I knew those guys are really tough, but they weren't in that area, so even though it's kind of the same creatures and architecture, it also feels like a different level in the sense of now you have to contend against this additional enemy type, one far more durable than any of the previous ones you had to contend with prior. When watching the trailer, I really just wanted to know, like, what would happen if you went in this direction or took this pathway that looks like it was a viable pathway. So here I am trying to explore this area and see if there's any additional branching off places that weren't shown in the trailer due to secrecy or time constraints, or maybe it's just not all that interesting. Like, I'm trying to go back. Oh, and here's a floppy bastard. So it's not like he sees you. If you get in this area in general, he goes after you. And there is an additional thing where he literally knocks you over when he attacks you. And here I am trying to shoot him. I think I missed that shot. And I am just getting, like, destroyed, and then I die. And this is the first time I die. Now, one of the complaints I've seen of the game is the checkpoint system. I was a little miffed that I was sent all the way back to the start of this area just because, like, I do the slow strat of letting the Kiwi walk by. But really, I never found the checkpoint system to be an issue. Like, it's weird there's no save stations, I'll get into that later, but like, I just run down here and here I am. I have no idea what the issue is, probably because I haven't died all that much playing this game. Like, it sends me to start of the area, so like, 15 seconds to run back here. I later die in the Crater Queen area, and it's the checkpoint was after I activate that third descending tunnel, and I've died in the boss fight, and it sends me to immediately before the boss fight happens. None of that is an issue as far as checkpoints go, and maybe I'm just lucky and I happen to die at the right time where everyone else dies at the wrong time. But there's definitely a criticism I don't think could adequately be applied to the game from what I've experienced. One thing that really caught me by surprise, though, is the fact that there was no grenade launcher in this area. In fact, I don't even have a shotgun yet, another weapon that was readily available in the trailers that I'm unable to pick up until later on in the level. And it's nowhere near here because you can see in the reload station there's no shotgun bullets to be found. Why would they put shotgun bullets in it if you don't have a shotgun? Though I do think it might have been actually interesting kind of world building if there were one or two in occasionally one of those reloading stations. Oh, here I just take a nice look at the floppy bastard's butthole. Very interesting creature design. The sort of implication that Scorn people have been running around with shotguns that they needed in those places, but, they've used all of the ammo and no one was there to replenish it. It is kind of interesting, though, from the world-building perspective that this is where you get the pistol, because this is an area that I guess Scorn people understood there are hostile entities in. Now, the idea that they're running around freely destroying architecture that a bunch of Scorn people probably worked really hard to set up, that's probably not intentional for Scorn society, but I do still think they were being harvested or farmed in some capacity. I think there was some method of control and regulation. And I do wonder if maybe I wasn't wrong and they really do have something to do with these, walnut-looking things. Like, maybe they don't grow out of them specifically, but I think in the concept art book, it said that, these creatures and Scorn people are made of the same meat. So maybe they're grown out of the Crater Queen, and then processed in these walnuts, and then that turns into Scorn people. And you see very similar, red fleshy colors with the Genesis wall, the wall that Scorn guy fell out of. So here I get into the elevator, and I remember from the trailer when you cause that door to rotate, it results in one of the bears kind of waking up and going on the prowl. In the trailer, the person actively fought that bear and ended up taking some damage because of it. And I was thinking, well, I've already avoided quite a few combat encounters already. And here we see that, the key is inadequate to progress. I've already avoided some combat counters, so what if I try that with this? Is that bear going to despawn, or is it the case that the enemy, or this enemy right here, absolutely has to be there? And as it turns out, if you just wait a little bit, he will eventually wander off and despawn. Again, it's been a common criticism for the game that the combat is bad, and I'm not going to say that the shooting and gunplay are, particularly fantastically executed. It's a pistol, it has a little mechanic of you needing to aim in order to get an accurate shot. The shotgun works like literally any other video game shotgun. The grenade launcher works like a video game grenade launcher. It's not breaking any new ground mechanically, though visually it definitely looks really cool. But if people would just hold off on trying to indulge in their killing instincts, I do think that they could have had a much better experience. Now here we get the next key upgrade, but in this area there was a grenade launcher, and I'm looking around for it there, trying to find it, and the only thing that's available is an ammo station that still does not even provide shotgun bullets because there's no shotgun to be found. Like in the trailer, I tried shooting through the bars, you can't. He used the grenade launcher, which had this implosive result, which is also seemingly missing from the final build. Like, that grenade launcher got screwed over, man. And even though I have enough bullets to handle this guy, I decided that instead of fighting him, we're just gonna play a very slow game of Ring Around the Rosie. Because as it turns out, if you're on the opposite side of this circular station here, he doesn't aggro. He just does not even notice that you're here, which is kind of funny. So we're just slowly turning, watching him as he disappears behind the central pillar. Which, by the way, you can actually see this structure in the 2016 trailer. I thought that was kind of interesting. I noticed the design on the central pillar and I made the connection. It is interesting to note that even though I was, looking around the environment and doing the slower strategies, I really only clocked 6 hours and 40 minutes into the game. And here you can see that, puzzle thing from the trailer isn't there. The health station is still there, though. And then there's another parasite moment, and this time your body changes, and now you have these tendrils on them. So it's just getting worse and worse for him, and I think by this point, he must be aware that I need to get this thing off of me. I almost wonder if that was his goal, from the start, when he first was attacked by the parasite, but then what was his goal when he first woke up? Is he still trying to go to Paulus? Does he know Paulus has a means of ripping this thing off? Is it just a happy coincidence that his initial target ended up having the technology needed to solve his current predicament? And here I notice that this takes me not to the area it did in the gameplay trailer, but instead to the area at the end of the gameplay trailer before it transitions to that surface clip and the portal door. Now, as I was saying before, I clocked in 6 hours and 40 minutes, and I took a few breaks, 15 or so minute breaks while playing. So if that's not a testament to how short the game is, that I'm doing slow strats and I still just barely meet the lowest thought of time frame for the game, I don't know what will. Now, if hiding away and waiting for enemies to run to a despawn zone just isn't the kind of thing you like to do, but you still don't like the combat, you can also run around enemies. It's a bit harder, especially with the prospect of getting caught on the enemy hitboxes, but it is a viable strategy, and if you get far enough, the enemies will forget about you and then wander into the despawn zone anyways. I do really think that the developers initially intended for people to have a kind of mixed playstyle where sometimes they attack the enemies, but sometimes they don't. And like I said before, that's unfortunately been lost on many gamers because it's in their instinct, it's something drilled into them that if there's a gun in the game, that makes it a shooter. So at this point, we're actually moving backwards through the 2020 gameplay trailer area. Like this here, actually I think we are moving forwards, but this here is where the ceiling penis was. And it's not there anymore because you don't have a grenade launcher. Like that one decision ultimately impacted like the pacing and combat and probably overall level design of this entire section. I've been under the impression that outside of like updating the graphics and asset quality, the developers were rather strict in their vision of things, that things are going to be in the place that they intend for them to be, and that's final. But the fact that still this late into the level I don't have a shotgun, let alone a grenade launcher, really makes me wonder just how much was moved around. The developers have said in the initial part of their development for the first few years, they would build things in chronological order. The Prologue room was built first, then the fields, then the 2017 room. And this room was built after they got enough funding to work on both Part 1 and Part 2 simultaneously. Was it always going to be immediately after the 2017 area? Who knows? One big difference between trailers and final build is the amount of enemies that there are. I've noticed there's, some enemies missing from this area. There wasn't that kiwi in the circular cage area. And this area here, there's like significantly less. There's just one floppy bastard, not two, not a kiwi, not a bear. It's just that one guy. And I think the reason for that is balancing, where since you only have a pistol, since they moved the time when you get a shotgun so far back, they couldn't, justify having that many enemies due to the fact it would be a balancing issue. You just love to see a fork in the road, right or left. I opt to go left. Strangely enough, in horror games, left is honestly more often the answer to progress forward than going right. I think probably because the developers assume that like most people would instinctively try going right in order to progress, and so they try to trip them up by making left the correct choice. Ebb Software did not try that. Going left does not really progress further into the area. It in fact just takes you to an ammo refilling station. And here I'm looking at the ceiling and I start to realize this is the area with that giant creature we saw in one of the previous trailers. Maybe if I progress further into a level, I'll see it, and I'm, just a little bit worried as to like how exactly it's going to play. Like, is it a boss fight? Would it actively try to kill me? Would there be like bears that spawn in as it's trying to kill me? Oh, and here's like a kiwi that's just meandering over, and I'm trying to be polite and staying back, but it notices me and aggroes. So, yeah, that kiwi is a total fucking jerk. I think kiwis have been the worst enemy for me in the playthrough. Like, they seem to be way more accurate than the bears. The floppy bastards can be bullet sponges, but if you have a shotgun, they're pretty easy to take care of, and they take 7 pistol shots, which I'm already being super conservative with thanks to my strategy. But the Kiwis seem to like aggro the easiest almost. As far as navigating in an area goes, outside of like the prologue when I first played it while kind of drunk, this has been the most difficult area for me to really navigate around. Like, it's where I got lost the most often and kind of wasted the most time looking for where to go next. And part of that is because it's significantly less linear than a lot of the other areas. There's more enemies, so you're thinking about a lot more different things. Oh yeah, and there's a crater queen. Interestingly, part of its mouth has been removed between this build and the trailer, which remember came out in like the summertime. So even as late as then, they were making these last minute decisions. But navigating around this large circular room, part of the problem was because this is like the final part of the crater, and so they upped the ante when it came to the enemies. And so you also had that kind of anxiety of, well, if I go over here, am I going to run into something that I might not be able to handle? Having played the game and knowing this part, I will say it's just another instance of Scorn's cruel nature. This thing never attacks you, she just kinda sits there and looks at you, though not really, cause she doesn't have functioning eyes, while you mercilessly utilize devices to rip holes into her. Holes that look like they're supposed to be there, cause you can see that sort of, slit there. So it seems like maybe when Scorn Society was functioning, everything was in place and poking into her. You would think it'd be a cathartic moment. This is a creature that is producing all of the monsters you've been facing so far. Every bear, kiwi, ceiling penis, or floppy bastard is ultimately her fault. And yet, you can't really feel that satisfaction. You're just causing undue pain. This thing might not even have a say in what comes out of her. It's just biology as biology does. If anything, the only creature I can say I truly don't like from a moral perspective is the parasite. And parasites almost inherently are evil. They live off of another being in order to satiate and sustain themselves. The bears and kiwis can be annoying, sure, but they're just dumb animals wandering around. And if you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. The parasite is the only thing that actively goes after you. Even the little gremlin guys, the homunculuses, I can understand why they would be angry. They're stuck in these weird jars, are used as a resource. No wonder if you give one a body and a grenade launcher, it'll do what it can to stop you. Hell, there's 3 of those, like, gremlin pods in that room. The first one doesn't attack you, you just puncture it and kill it. So it could even be that they saw you puncture it and kill it, and don't want to die. It's self-preservation. And yeah, you can argue the parasite is also self-preservating. It didn't choose to evolve that way. But, I don't know, get a better evolutionary history if you don't want me to think you're a piece of shit, dude. So yeah, here I take some damage, and I don't think I actually healed there. Like, I still have 1 or 2 health points left, or hit points. I always called them health points. and I'm wandering into a new area. You have to see that yellow flash or whatever to know that you've actually successfully healed. Just having the part of the animation doesn't do it, and I guess in the moment I didn't realize that because I was so busy thinking about getting away from the enemies. And the enemies don't really follow you into that, central area. It's almost like a safe zone of sorts, which I actually think is pretty good game design because, first of all, it means that you're not in any danger every single area of the game, but it can also kind of play with your mind a little bit because you're in the safe zone, you're not going to be killed here. You have to then encourage yourself to actually go out into the danger zone again, rather than just sitting back and not facing any Kiwis. And here you can see some of the creatures actually sprouting from her back. And I think those guys were just always there. We weren't able to see them during the initial showcase of this huge creature, although it could also be that digging into her with these that caused such a disruption that it ends up forcing those creatures up and out of her. I do notice that the enemy count seems to get bigger and bigger as we progress through this. It makes sense from a gameplay perspective, the level gets harder as you go on, but also makes sense from a in-universe perspective. You're killing our mother, so we're going to do even more to try and stop you. Pretty much immediately after that, there's another parasite moment, and it's probably the least welcomed one just because of the fact that this is the final really combat-heavy area in the game other than the boss fight. So health is likely very precious to a lot of players here, especially if they were the players who didn't run away or wait for the enemies to move over and despawn. For this puzzle here, I initially tried to solve it here and now, trying to move the white dot into the glowing circle. That's pretty self-evident. Wasn't able to, was spinning this around, and realized that this is just something I need to deal with later. I can't fully utilize it here. And here, where the the ammo station is, I noticed the shotgun bullets and immediately checked for the shotgun. Now, it's great having heavier firepower. It's nice having a means of killing the floppy bastards easier, or hell, even the bears. But like before, I'm a bit paranoid because if they give you a new weapon, they might expect you to use it. Now, I don't know if it's actually the case, but I've noticed, at least in my own playthrough, that the enemies don't really interrupt you when you're using the ammo or health stations. Now, granted, I don't think I was in any real position of danger when I was using them during my playthrough, and I didn't have to use them all too often given the conservative nature of my ammo usage. But I do wonder if that's something they built in the game where, hey, you're basically in an extended cutscene. We're gonna not allow the enemies to hit you until you're out of the cutscene and can properly fight back. I get the next tier upgrade for my key item, and this kind of highlights one of the problems I have with the area is that it is very easy to get lost in it. I know that part of the marketing and stuff was that you're lost and alone in a maze-like structure, but compared to the 2017 area, the 2020 gameplay area, or even the Prologue area, there's not just enough to really distinguish what side of the giant circle you're on. It's just Gigerian architecture and bear corpses littering everything, which thus makes it very easy for everything to kind of blend together. The biggest hint as to where to go next is I was previously unable to open this door, now I can, so that's where I'm supposed to go. And where for other areas like the 2017 area, that works just fine because then you can kind of walk out into the main hub and get a good look at all the rest of the level. Here it doesn't work as well because it seems a lot more enclosed. There's a lot more danger that would prevent you from doing this kind of wandering. And again, because it's a symmetrical structure all around, it can end up just looking very sameish. You wouldn't really know if you are on the right side or how to get to the right side. So I suppose this really is like the one area that I actually struggled in. Maybe I got a bit lost in Polis sometimes, not knowing if I should go down the left or right staircase, or where to go in order to leave through a specific way, but because there wasn't really any present dangers, it didn't really have much of an impact getting lost in that place. Here, I know I can die, and I don't know where the checkpoints are. I've mentioned that the autosave system worked perfectly fine for me. It sent me back to previously established locations that make perfect sense for being where an autosave would send you. For example, once I use that console over there, the game's autosave is going to decide if you die, that's where you'll respawn after you use it. However, when playing through the game for the first time, I don't know really where the autosave would take me and how generous it is. There always is that potential fear of if I die, I go all the way back to when I first came to this area. And so, if you don't have manual save stations, and it is kind of weird that you don't, because that was a thing in the 2017 build, even if we didn't see it in the actual demo. Like, did you not know how to integrate it, like, ludo-narratively? How to make sense of if you die, you basically teleport to this other location? And one of the ideas with it was that you would only be able to use it once. You can save in that save station and that's it. No running from the save station, doing a thing, and running back to make sure you don't have to do the thing anymore. I guess maybe they realize that autosaves also accomplish this and doesn't require them to figure out how to make the world building work. It's a necessary video gamey thing that happens. But if they are using autosaves, one thing I think they really should have is an indicator as to when the autosave has turned on and marked your progress in the game's files. Yes, it's video gamey, yes, it's a bit immersion breaking, but it also allows a gamer to focus more on the level at hand, actually be scared of the enemies, and not just be scared of the prospect of losing progress. You could put the little Scorn S in the top right corner of the screen. The player will notice it and be able to say, okay, if I die, this is where I'm going back to. And now they can focus on just playing through the game and not avoiding losing progress. That's just something that game designers in general have to contend with. Are players worried about the challenges because it's an actual challenge, or are they just worried about that? And it doubles so for horror games, because horror is a type of emotion that can be very hit or miss with games. They want you to be scared, whereas most other games just want you to have fun and maybe even turn your brain off for a bit. So here you can see me using the final console that I need to in this room, and so the stage is set, and the save point or checkpoint has also been written. There's no indication, like I said before, so I had no idea that this is where I would be sent back to. Later on, I go down and I find a ammo refilling station that I haven't used before, so I decide to top myself off. Conservative as I may be when it comes to combat, this area can definitely deplete you of ammo pretty quickly during the few times where you do need to fight. And for whatever reason here, I wasn't able to raise my shotgun. I don't know if I was pressing the wrong button, but the floppy bastard hits me and I take a fat L, and for the second time in the game, I die. And this is where I was really worried, because I don't know where it was going to send me. I look at the splash screen, I wait for it to load, and I am then just relieved that here I am, by this console that I used previously. I take a moment to get a sense of my bearings, and I realize that, hey, the checkpoint system is honestly pretty good. And all I need to do is just run back to the area I got the ammo from, and this time try to actually shoot them. Like you can see, that was a hallway that I backed up into. Like, it's just right there. It's a few seconds away. So, yeah, I don't know why there's so many criticisms of the checkpoint system. And here, I realize, I think, that I don't have any ammunition currently in a shotgun, so I just let them kill me, and I try to re-strategize. Now, if I had to, do a ton of this level over, let alone the whole level over, I would have already been pissed to have died, and I would have been fucking livid there if it was the same scenario, but because the checkpoints make sense and are pretty forgiving, I just treat it as an opportunity to try again and get farther next time. I don't feel any, rage or anxiety or anything like that about having to run away to a different area or having to try again. This is why it's better to be forgiving with checkpoints and to be very conservative with them. Now down here, I also die because of this floppy bastard. I end up backing myself into a corner, and for whatever reason, the shotgun didn't do, the same amount of damage. It's not a two-hitter. And I'm trying to, switch over to weapon to use. I think I ended up switching over to the piston, and so, again, it's well, I died. Let's try again. Shoot him once, run around. Now I have 2 bullets in chamber for the next volley. This was actually kind of fun, figuring out the best strategy as to how to handle these creatures. It's also basically the last, sort of mandatory-ish combat moment in the area, and even then you can just run away from the creatures, which I think I do end up doing during this section. I'm running over because I know that's where the floppy bastard spawns. I kill him, I try running away, and I end up getting caught on the Kiwi's hitbox. That was a little bit annoying. And because I'm so frantically trying to run away and avoid dying to the enemies, because save points might be forgiving, but I still don't want to die, I run past the door I need to go through in order to descend to the lower levels and get really lost. Though, because of that, I end up going up here, and I kind of clue myself in as to where I'm going to be going after this level ends. So yeah, right there, right by the floppy bastard that I killed is where I was supposed to go down to. While getting lost in the facility is kind of annoying, I can't really hold this against the game too much. It is, after all, a bit of my fault that I didn't notice this door and ran by it. I was so focused on the combat, I didn't focus on the exploration. I think of all the puzzles, this one might actually be my favorite. Once I understood what the mechanics are and how it works, that where you move the white ball round on one side, if you rotate it, the white ball will be there on that side too, regardless of if it had to pass through a wall when you weren't looking. And so at first I thought, well, what if I take it up to the top right or top left? That didn't work, so I then switched over to moving it further to the bottom right, and then was able to kind of meander it to a point where it's able to get into the orange circle. It's a simple concept, but I think it was well executed, and it was fun to figure out. To have to compare the different pathways to ones that I can't see in order to know if when I place it here, will it actually be able to move further into the square. If there is one thing I do agree with some of the negative reviews about, the combat isn't all that thrilling or, unique, so I would have much preferred there to be more puzzles like this in the game, just because it was the most interesting and intellectually engaging part of this area. The fact that it's the only time that you actually do this puzzle also helps make it feel special. In any case, the whole area rises up, crushing the Crater Queen with it. You hear agonizing moans and groans, and if you were feeling sympathetic for her earlier, you're probably feeling even worse now. You would like there to be a different way of progressing and not having to hurt her, regardless of how annoying her children are, but of course it's Scorn. It's a cruel world. Now, outside of the fields, this was the first really unique area that we've seen. The 2017 area does look very different, but we've seen it before, and it's a question of if there would have been any more unique areas. Well, some were cut. There was actually a level called, the Blasted Ruins, which was a war zone between the Homoculi creatures, and an area called the Tower, which was similar in nature to the one we were just at, which is why it was cut. Though I kind of feel they could have reworked it a little bit, maybe not have enemies in it to distinguish it from this area. But it's where that shot at the end of the 2016 trailer would have been, that kind of ribcage bridge Scorn guy walks across, and that, I would argue, is a pretty iconic location in the game's promotional material, so for it to be cut is rather disappointing. And that's not the only iconic piece of Scorn imagery that was cut. But I do think having another level would have really helped with the game's pacing and game length. It's just a bit too short. It needed just another thing added to it in order to really make the game feel proper and worth the price. I do like how you can see some of the other facilities you've been through in this shot here, though. It really gives you a sense of how far you've come, given that you're in an underground area and don't get context. It's also where another parasite moment happens. This little hitchhiker of ours is really becoming more trouble than he's worth. And since in the next area the only losing condition is really a boss fight, he really is worthless at this point. Scorn guy can hold all the crap he needs to. He doesn't need this extra set of arms anyways. Nonetheless, this mix between horsehair worm and cordyceps is here for the ride still, and we need to find a way to remove it. I'm pretty sure everyone understood that's the general plot of the game by this point. What's happening? I don't get the story. Dude, there's some hostile thing literally growing inside of our character. He doesn't want it in there anymore. We need to help him get to the place where he can remove it. If you think that's a difficult story, eat a tapeworm, you'll figure it out eventually. But yeah, with just a brief glance at the surface, the fields, and leaving behind the crater, we take a ride on this tram and end up arriving at Polis. It's just a little bit disappointing that it did go to Paulus because, again, it would have been nice to have another area in between. Definitely doesn't have to be as challenging as that previous area. It could have been like an intermediary similar to the Fields of Decay, where you're just walking around exploring the ruins of something, learning a little bit of interesting lore. But nonetheless, it's going to Paulus, which is interesting world building wise at like the direct line from the heart and soul of Bear territory is connected with this city that's, as far as like flesh parasite, all that issue goes, is immaculate and untouched. It's in a state of decay, but there's no bear corpses. And I suspect that the huge bridge out directly outside the Prologue area probably also goes to Paulus, since that's where new three-eyed Scorn people are grown. Congratulations on life, buddy. Now head over to the Sex Temple. Now, of all the areas I knew about in the game, the one I was looking forward to most was Paulus. And it did actually end up being my favorite area in the game. I really like the architecture, I like the color palette, I like the statues, the puzzle was pretty nice. The boss fight, video gamey, but I don't think it's a terrible addition to the game. And being a late game area, this is where we would see most of the lore. This is where we will get a better understanding of Scorn civilization and its history. There's something just so captivating and mysterious about this place. Unlike the factory settings, which even in real world factories are a miserable place, this was an area of respite and flourishing. It's covered in sexual iconography, and we find out in the game's art book and general analysis of the area that was a place of transcendence, of ascension beyond the confines of the flesh. Scorn's world is a miserable fucking place. There's areas that are to process sentient creatures into white goop, power, parasite, fluid, whatever. There's factories where presumably creatures are grown and then harvested and broken down into raw resources to grow more Scorn people. But this is something different, and it's so mysterious it was a genuine question of what is this place even for? Is it just to fuck? Is there some deity they're worshipping? We know now, but that was part of the fun leading up to Scorn, just wondering what's going on. And where everyone else, even the environment, looked cruel, the hazy, fog-ridden desert of the Fields of Decay, the enclosed biomechanical factories of the Abate Assembly, this area looks peaceful. It's covered in white fluffy clouds above, and as white bone architecture below. It's almost inviting, far more than anything we've seen so far, and I'm sure it was considered incredibly beautiful to the Scorn Society who built it. It seems almost like a reward in of itself for having braved the horrors of the previous area. You've gone through this difficult boss segment, well, boss-like segment, it's mainly the generic NPCs who are the problem. Now you get to have some peace and quiet in the Sex Temple. In that sense, I understand why they removed the blasted labyrinth and the tower, because what could you do after the Abate Assembly that would make this stark contrast that much better? I think maybe you could have had something between the different trailer location areas to still allow for those locations to be in the game. And I still do think those locations should have been in the game, even if the reprieve from being in such a hostile environment beforehand and such a serene location in the next is like genuinely a wonderful experience. But if they did have to nix those areas in order for the experience to work, then I think Polis should have been a longer place. It's not quite as short as the Fields of Decay, though I think the Prologue area you go back to is also considered a part of the Fields of Decay, but it is noticeably shorter than the crater area, despite being, in my opinion, the far more interesting place. And I think worse yet, a lot of stuff that we kind of thought would be here wasn't. Not in the sense that it's not in Polis, it's in a different level, but it's not anywhere. The 2020 trailer was one of my favorites, the one that came out in May. It, first of all, ended the second longest time between updates of the game, the worst being the 2021 period, but it also presented such unique imagery. It was the first time we saw sexual elements in Scorn, something we only speculated about beforehand, and it's the first time we saw Polis, a rather beautiful place and not some vile facility. And it had so many just iconic images that became like the standard iconography for people posting Scorn stuff. The giant head statue room does not appear in the game, despite that being one of the crowning locations that a lot of the trailer focused on. There's something kind of like that outside the front gates of Polis, and you do see the pregnant shell statue things, but the room itself is gone, and that means all of the work that went into modeling that room and setting up the architecture is effectively wasted, and in a game that's already gone through so many delays, coming out this short and finding out that it might have come out sooner if they just stuck with a plan or didn't bother working on something that they weren't going to use, that kind of stings a bit. I'm aware that in game design, there's a lot of changes made as the game, further development, but axing like entire rooms or removing things that look like they were part of a puzzle, like the horsecock faucet that a lot of people were memeing about. You knew it was something people were looking forward to seeing in the game, and it's just gone. It's not there. It's not a part of Scorn's final build. And it could have been if Polis was a larger area, if there were more to explore, if we could go down to some of those bridge segments that we're walled off from. They started developing the game in 2014. They've effectively built it from the ground up in the 2015 to 2017 era. They've done that again 2018 to 2020, and I say that because it really does seem like such significant changes have been made in game design between that year and the release, probably contributing to the longest delay the game had, the stark, silent 2021 period, that you wonder what was Scorn like before it became what it is today. Where did all those iconic imageries go? Why isn't there more to explore in what's arguably the most interesting area of the game because of its lore significance? The devs said that there wouldn't be any spin-offs, sequels, or DLC. But they've also said that it would be part 1 of 2 and that there'd be no cutscenes. So I don't think what they've said before is set in stone. And the fact that they have been willing to alter their vision so much, to alter the level design so significantly, to remove things that seemed extremely important in the concept material, to outright axe important aspects of the world's history, I think they can make a expansion or DLC that adds more to this area. And I think they should. I think they should come out with an expansion, work on one, that when you download it, it expands Polis. Maybe it even adds like another level before you return to Polis. And maybe something in the expansion and the extra area, some moral choice you make affects the ending of the game. I think that would significantly improve the game for many people. It would be longer and therefore justify the price. It would have a rather satisfying ending. It doesn't have to be thrilling or super happy. It can still be something somber, but better than the cruel fate that awaits our character right now. Because as of right now, I hate to say it, but it doesn't feel like Scorn. It feels like Scorn Part 1 of 2 Das Sein. It feels like we've only gotten part of what game it should have been, and that's just frustrating. I'm aware that the amount of time it's taken to develop is due to factors beyond just general incompetence. You've gotten additional funding and want to remake the game from the ground up. But having been sitting on the sidelines, watching in for several years, not being privy to how development is going, not knowing what you're doing or what the final product is going to be like, there is genuinely a sense of disappointment in the fact that there's really not much in it as it stands, and the ending is rather unsatisfying given the journey we go through, and that there aren't really any moral choices that affect anything beyond the achievements. I was just hoping there'd be a little bit more, and unfortunately, there just isn't. And it is a genuine question as if there ever will be, because maybe that's the one thing that the developers are absolutely adamant about. And boy, would that be unfortunate. There are some games that you just know the developers are incompetent morons, and so you hope the game fails because there's no chance of it being great. I have no hope for Bethesda. If the next Skyrim or Fallout game fails, I'll laugh. But there's some games that you genuinely hope will be fantastic, some games that you hope will be life-changing. I guess in some ways Scorn is life-changing. I mean, my entire YouTube career is practically revolved around this title. It's lived rent-free in my head for many years now. And I'd like to think that I, more than anyone else, has tempered his expectations as to what the game will be like. I expected a slow-paced survival horror that focuses more on exploration and puzzles than does on combat, and I guess I was right. That is exactly what it is. But I really hope the game would be truly amazing, 10 out of 10, one of the best games I've ever played and ever could play. Maybe that irrational desire is what kind of hampers my enjoyment of the game. Maybe if I just bumblefucked my way into knowing about the game a day before it released, I'd have a much better experience of it. I wouldn't have all these thoughts and theories about what this or that thing in the trailers meant, only to discover that some stuff in the trailers were cut due to who knows what reason, and some stuff, like the portal at the very end of the 2020 gameplay trailer, was literally just there for the trailer. It was never intended to mean anything, because it doesn't mean anything. It means marketing, advertising, and that's just disappointing, 'cause they also emphasize lack of cutscenes, so that had to have been something in the game and not some pre-rendered cutscene for them to play for the trailer. I can stand, a short game. Maybe that's just me wanting more of this world. I can stand not having the cut content because that's just me being invested in lore. But deliberately lying to your audience like that, Yeah, throw it in the trailer. Maybe we'll make something of it, maybe we won't. Not only will we not, we won't have a lot of other stuff we've shown off either. That's just poor form. I put a lot of thought into that scene. I had this notion that it was a kind of death transition, their way of explaining the respawn mechanics in the game's universe. And I would have been fine with being wrong about my theory. I don't care. I've been wrong about other theories as well. That's not a problem. That's just the nature of coming up with these fan theories. But to have had absolutely no chance at all for that assumption to be right, to have absolutely no chance at all of really knowing what that's for, because it's not for anything, and the developers knew it's not for anything, but they put it in anyways, that might be the one thing about this game that genuinely angers me. And unlike, say, making Paulus larger or having some kind of change in what you do that would lead to an actual moral choice that would affect replayability and not just your achievement list, I don't think there's a way to fix that. It's not something that they can just arbitrarily add in, because people will know they just arbitrarily added in. So they probably shouldn't bother with that anyways, but I do think they should take the advice I've given them about what else to do. Because these simple changes, just making the last area larger or having a different ending that you can unlock through a choice, one would be enough. Would have made the game so much better to so many more people without fundamentally ruining the actual game mechanics or concepts. And I've ranted about, all of this start to finish, and here we are pretty firmly in the boss fight. There really isn't much to say about it. It's a video gamey boss fight. You strafe around the enemy, dodging his attacks until the enemy reveals his weak point. Then you do a thing, and the enemy goes into his second phase, a harder one. That's fine with me. It's a video game. This is about as tried and true as a boss fight mechanic can be. It's a bit unfortunate that it's really the only boss fight there is, though. At least the respawn point is decent. I died during the boss's final phase, and the game just set me down before putting the little gremlin guy in his chassis. So there's that, I guess. It is a bit difficult to, try to talk about the game again after going over just, I think, one of the lowest fucking aspects of this title. I will say one criticism of this scene here is when you first put the gremlin into the cyborg, there's really nothing to indicate you're supposed to poke it or shoot it or anything. And you really haven't been doing that much to items, to collectibles. And while it is kind of clear that this thing might be hostile, you still don't know if it truly is an enemy or not. Perhaps having the blasted labyrinth and seeing other cyborgs would have clued that into you. Or in for you. It also seems a little bit weird in-universe that this is only the second of 3 of these gremlin things you put in the cyborg. The first time was fine, you're just seeing what it does. Second time, that causes a boss fight to happen, and it actively tries to kill you. So why would it happen with the third time? Why doesn't he just puncture the gremlin pod there while it's sitting out in the open, not a current or present threat to your character? Wouldn't that cause it to spill out and allow you to put in the gremlin pressing machine anyways? This seems like it would have been an opportunity to reward player ingenuity. You go through the second boss fight, you get what's necessary to open that gate to the third gremlin, and some players will try to put it in the boss chassis again, and therefore go through another fight, but others might try to avoid a fight by just destroying the pod while it's out in the open and get that result there. Maybe there's some lore reason as to why it needs to be in the cyborg, something that prepares blood of it to be processed into the fluid that's injected into the shells. And maybe if you skip out on doing the boss fight, that's what leads to the bad ending, while if you do the boss fight, you get the good ending. It would also kind of tie back to the first and only decision that you made in the game, whether or not you scoop Mold Man or saw him, whether or not you kill him or free him, making a choice that you might not fully understand what the outcome will be, and sometimes it subverts your expectations. There's definitely a sense of timing with this boss fight. You can't really reload when you're actively in the fight because your movement speed is decreased so much. You certainly wouldn't want to be reloading the pistol while this guy is lobbing grenades at you. And so you wonder, like, do I just allow him to be down, vulnerable, but not shoot him so I can put in more ammunition for next time that the challenge comes up? Or should I just try to reload my weapon real quick or switch over to a different one and use that? It seems like using the shotgun is the fastest option, though it is hard to tell since I've only gone through this boss fight once and maybe all the weapons do the same damage, which would also be kind of weird considering they're two different classes of weapons and the shotgun definitely is more powerful than the pistol. When it comes to bosses, when it comes to all enemies, they all have basically a hidden health bar, something the game uses to track how much damage they've taken. Some speedrunners of games like Resident Evil 8 have the hidden health bar turned on, so it's viewable to the runner, so they can see what damage is being done to their enemies and how much longer they'd have to endure playing the game before they can finally finish it and hope they got gold splits. Without being able to see something like that, I don't think I'll be able to judge whether or not the shotgun or the pistol is really doing more damage. What I do like is that there are ammo reloading stations and health stations in this area. Not only a hint about the fact that there's a boss fight coming up, so it's best to top yourself off, but if you do manage to defeat the boss without losing too much of either, there's a chance you can top off for the next phase. In any case, the next fight against this thing goes much better for me. There actually is a strategy that I discovered for making this fight a lot easier, and maybe what the devs intended for you to do. If you use the piston machine on the boss, what you want to do is you want to hit its Scorn guy head first, and then the chassis will open up, and then you can hit the gremlin thing inside. It took me a little while to figure this out. As you can see from the gameplay here, I'm poking and prodding at his chest rather than the head, but there I think I accidentally hit the head a little bit and managed to do a little bit of damage. Again, it's a bit video gamey, the boss gets harder every time, and he certainly does seem to get a lot faster and a lot more aggressive. He's no longer lobbing grenades at me, he wants to punch me, and when he hits me with his hand, he hits harder than any of those grenades could hope to. Overall, I think this is a simple but effective and fun boss fight. It allows for a little bit of strategy, it allows for you to try to figure things out, but it's not so difficult and unforgiving that it becomes a point of frustration. The only arduous part really is waiting for him to expose his weak point. But with some decent gameplay and using the environment as a kind of shield against the enemy, you are able to defeat him, and you can see there, that's where I figured it out. I hit the head clearly, the chest piece opened up, now I know what to do. It's gamer time. Some people did have a lot of trouble with this fight, and on one hand, that's somewhat understandable. The game didn't really have any bosses beforehand. Most of the enemy encounters, if not all of them, were optional. And here, you're locked in a room against a being that you cannot just immediately kill. If you've avoided combat up to this point, now you have. Skill issue. Amusingly, I never realized that you could grab the grenades from the back of him during my fight. So instead, when I ran out of grenades for the third boss, or I guess second boss, but more or less a third phase of the boss you can think of it as, I ran out of grenades and decided, you know what, I'm just gonna let him kill me, and thankfully, the developers, having decent checkpoints, just placed me before I fought that third boss thing. I've said before when talking about the arm pulling animation that each one of them is unique, and that's the same with putting this gremlin guy into this chamber. The way it gets crushed, the animation is different for all three of them. These are small details I really enjoy because it does make the game feel more realistic. Even in a heavily industrialized, automated society, if biology is involved, it's going to behave just a little bit differently each time. That's the nature of life. No two things are exactly the same. We also get an additional challenge in the form of the parasite preventing us from using any other weapon. I do wonder what would happen if we ran in here with the piston or the shotgun. Would it take a while for the animation to occur? If when we changed to the grenade launcher, it wouldn't happen during the boss fight because you need to use a grenade launcher in order to open up this gate here by standing on this pressure plate and shooting inside. And maybe once you switch to the grenade launcher and the animation happens, that will be a clue about what you're supposed to do there. Something slides down, the game says no, it's grenade launcher or nothing. Use your gamer brain. But I'd like to point out the fact that it slides down. And even though I talked about how you might be able to destroy this if the game had multiple choices, some might balk at the fact that you don't have the piston thing, how can you destroy it? Maybe your character just beats it and breaks it that way with a grenade launcher. Now, this is effectively the third phase of the boss fight. This is after you've already fought one of these things, and I think the developers were aware that gamers wouldn't necessarily want to do the whole thing over again. There's a challenge of the fact that you have a weapon with much more limited ammo, though there is a ready ammo deposit in the room that I missed. But having gone through it once, having effectively gone through it twice, they might not want to go through the whole thing again. And so the way to defeat this guy is a little different. Rather than trying to hit its chest, it'll eventually open up its back and you're supposed to throw a grenade in there. I ran out of ammo just as I figured that out. But it's a one-hit kill for that guy, so they really did understand this is a more powerful weapon, this is a boss you fought before, we need you to have 3 gremlins so that you can fill up the syringe, but we're not going to unduly waste your time with the boss fight. Now it is on me that I didn't understand how to replenish my ammunition. When I was trying to shoot a grenade in him, you could see he was reaching in his own back for ammunition. I didn't think that I could do that with a dead guy with his back clearly exposed. So that death is definitely on me, but hey, the checkpoints don't suck. It's just back to when the boss fight started. And now that I know what to do, I'm not going to shoot at him and waste my ammunition. It's a video game boss fight after all. You just dodge his attacks until he exposes his weak point. The enemy AI is fairly simple. If you're too far away, it's either gonna slowly move towards you or try shooting grenades at you. If you're very close, it's going to try and punch you. After it does a certain amount of moves or spends a certain amount of time not winning or uses up all of its grenades, it then plays a reloading animation, and that's when you get to attack. It's pretty simple. And even the timing for being able to fire the grenade in him is pretty generous. I do like the boss fight, and I kind of wish there were more. Not the exact same, of course. A different enemy to fight would certainly be appreciated, but it would be nice to have at least one more boss fight to talk about. But with that, we get the final gremlin, or at least try to. And then we do the same thing we've done 2 times before. No reprieve for this little bastard. No mercy in the world of Scorn. It's time to get that juice flowing. Right now, there's really not much to say about these guys. If the blasted labyrinth was still in the game, we might have felt a little bit bad for these things, since they would have been presented as an advanced organism. An advanced organism used as a mere resource, but an advanced one nonetheless. Maybe gain a bit of appreciation for the struggle they made to survive in this area. Instead, it kind of seems more like they're just automatons. We get the penultimate parasitic infection scene, with now our other hand being encased in the tendrils. We're unable to pick up machines. We're unable to use the wrist key. We are effectively locked in our own body, unable to manipulate the world around us, except for that which the parasite allows. Which means we're not able to put the juice into the shell area. Instead, Scorn Guy just shows his hand encased in parasitic tendrils, not dissimilar to how he would show his hand when you didn't have the wrist key and needed to use something that required the wrist key. Another element of decent game design is that you've probably seen these sliding doors before because they were in an earlier area. You probably didn't know what you were supposed to do with them prior, but something was blocking you from getting through that gate. Well, now you know. And now you can go through. You might also go back to this machine, one that now has a different animation for when you have the parasite hand in it. You need to use that in order to free yourself, but doing so, the parasite will try to fight back and regain its control. My first instinct was to try and run over to the pregnant woman, then I tried running over to here. I wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, but now that I see my hand return to its previous state, I understand this is temporary, and if I want to use anything with that hand, I know that I am running on borrowed time. This was seen as a little bit frustrating by some people, but I think it's fine. It's a rather unique bit of gameplay. You have to do something within a certain time limit. And sometimes you have to go back and redo the machine, a short animation, in order to progress further on. You can still heal yourself, which is important. And there are, I think, at least one healing station in this top level, so you should still have health when you need to. It also, again, further emphasizes the cruel nature of Scorn. And for world building, it is peculiar that they even have these machines here that's capable of subduing certain amounts of the parasite, almost like it's a common problem. Yet when I try to run to the pregnant thing room, the parasite returns. I think if I hadn't wasted my time so much earlier, I would have thought that maybe I could try that again, but because it happened so soon after removing it, I understood that there's like a hard wall there preventing me. This is just like a fun little game. You have to wait for the things to line up properly, but of course if you want to reload your grenade launcher, well, it's back to this. I think I show every time I do this, cause while I was fine with it, it can admittingly seem kind of tedious, especially if you want to do something as quick as restock your grenade launcher. Perhaps if there's a speedrun of the game, they will better be able to time this stuff. Thankfully, though, you don't need that hand in order to fire your weapon, which means you don't have to time running back here and then being able to have the perfect shot. Overall, I felt this section of the game was pretty well designed. It allowed for an increased sense of urgency, but it didn't ruin the story that much in the sense you're wondering why the parasite doesn't attack you even further. It's because you were staving it off. You were resetting its progress. It needs to get that hand before it can get anything else. But of course, it does still feel a bit like a race against time. You want to get as many things done so you can stop putting your hand in the machine and losing some health as a parasite tries to regain control. Losing health isn't the absolute worst thing in the world here, because again, I think there's a healing station somewhere around here, which you don't need to use that hand in order to replenish, but you would rather your character not unduly suffer. But of course, it's me I'm talking about, and my playthrough was 6 hours and 40 minutes, so you could imagine I was looking around this area quite a lot. For all the negativity that I had when first approaching this area, talking about how beautiful it is and then lamenting about how short it is and then going over just all of the other major problems I have with the game, it genuinely is a spectacular place. There's something so outworldly about it. Seeing the brains strung in the air on the walls, emanating from these cadavers. And you get a sense, even here, that this isn't like the previous facilities. These brains are supposed to be here. It's intentional, not like the bare residue or the vast amounts of cum in the Prologue area. Biology is tricky and unruly. It's governed by evolution, a system of nature whose response to any problem is, good enough. Who would say, if you were to ask it, why does my appendix not work, or do I have this or that physiological problem, it would reply with, hey, did you die before you're able to reproduce? If not my problem. Maybe your offspring won't be born with those genes, now piss off. To go into a bit more lore, it seems like this society was trying to bring order to the chaos of nature. It wanted to control it, but life finds a way to screw over even the best laid out plans. And so that's why some of this machinery is here. Maybe the parasite is actually part of some kind of ascension ritual, but needs to come off eventually, and maybe Scorn Guy's parasite is just defective. Maybe other parasites are able to form a true symbiotic relationship, and this is the opportunity to get it off and try again. Of course, we have to go back and stick our hand into another one of those machines after looking out at a sprawling expanse that we quite frankly can't explore. Hell, even if we could get on that bridge, those bodies piling up there would not allow me to go any further. But I've talked enough about how I'd want to explore every nook and cranny of this wonderful city, so I'll save my breath. Instead, it's time to have one last clamp, this time being the farthest away from the thing you want to interact with so far. A real sense of urgency, especially given that our character is pretty darn slow. And when you see what's attached to him, you might forgive him for being slow, although he does run at the same speed as he does in the pre-parasite form. Your body explodes, a real alien moment, something I'm sure a lot of people considered when watching this scene. And what a thrilling scene it is, just one rather shocking scene before another. But this might be the point that's best for our protagonist, because it's a point where he's finally going to take the parasite off. He no longer has to endure it. He no longer has to endure this other Scorn person literally piggybacking off of him, utilizing Scorn Guy's biomass and energy in order to fix itself. It's time for an eviction. You didn't pay rent. In fact, you trashed the place. Parasite, fuck off. This is also the second time we use a machine that gives a third-person view of ourselves, and I do kind of wish we use that technology more often, because it is genuinely interesting. How does it work? What are we viewing with, even? In any case, I do the thing, I get the achievement. Like 4 of the 12 achievements are in this, section of the game alone. But unfortunately, the parasite escapes, and I don't know, maybe an alternate ending, you do something to ensure the parasite won't escape. I'm gonna push that, alternate ending thing the entire video, because I just really freaking want it. Our boy deserves better. He has his guts hanging out. He's holding his intestines in with his other hand. And he does that admittingly pretty video gamey thing where your movement speed and camera is a bit hobbled, a bit altered because of the serious damage you sustained. I've seen this in a few games. Hell, it happens at the penultimate moment in Journey when you're trying to ascend that mountain, but it ends up becoming a task that's impossible for you to do. In some ways, Scorn's ending does remind me a bit of Journey, that lowest point here, dying, wondering if there will be a reprieve, only to then find some sort of salvation. Well, Journey's character might have found salvation. We'll see how it goes for Scorn Guy. I will admit this was a genuinely shocking scene. Your body has changed so much over the course of the game due to the parasite, and now even when it's removed, you're left in a worse state than you were before. You cannot survive like this. You cannot go on for much longer. Something else has to be done, and maybe it involves those 2 pregnant statue things. Almost implying as if Scorn Guy always intended to find those statues. Removing the parasite was his main goal, but he didn't need to do anything downstairs other than get the grenade launcher in order to access the means of doing that. He didn't need to kill all of the gremlin things. He could have left the 3rd one down there, and he didn't need to heal up any of the pregnant statue things. So that had to have been part of a larger goal for him beyond just removing the parasite. And I think maybe he's aware that removing the parasite does cause you to be flayed a bit. Because the other, dead Scorn people there, the ones with their chests held open, that's kind of like what we have here. Ours is just a lot worse off because our parasite was more defective. So maybe the reason he's heading over here in general was because he knows about the ritual, he wants to perform it in order to remove the parasite, whether or not he reaches any other form of ascension. We don't know much about the world in general though, what's going on beyond the borders of the game's areas. So we don't know if the rest of the world is more like the Fields of Decay and the Crater, or if there's plenty of areas quite like this. It could be that this is the only reprieve left on the entire planet. Scorn Guy is fortunate enough to have been born close enough to it that he could reach it in a few hours, but unfortunate enough to have been born in a time and place where a parasite, a defective one, a hungry and angry and scornful one, is wandering around, saying that if I can't reach Paulus, if I can't reach Ascension, neither can you. And even though I knew there were no losing conditions here, I could stand around for hours and my character would be fine, I will admit, this moment really did make me double think about if I go to the left, are the stairs going to take me down to the statues, shells here? Or is it going to be a broken stairs and my character's going to have to endure this for longer? Not many games can make me think that way. Not many games can briefly take me out of the knowledge I'm playing a video game and actually want me to invest in the game's world. It wakes up and rises up and you get another achievement. Again, this is a very achievement-heavy segment, more so than all of the crater, and that was an area much longer or much bigger than this one. I tried walking around to some of the statues just to get a better look at them and see what's going on, and then I approached this thing back here because I recalled briefly seeing it highlight when I was behind it, and so I know it's an interactable, and you get this rather shocking scene of your character being bound and restricted. And then, for the fans I guess, you also see his penis. For all the cruelty that the developers thrusted upon our poor boy, they at least gave him a decent-sized wiener. This shocking multi-armed automata comes over. Scorn doesn't have any digital technology, it's all analog, and so the robotic movements, the precision behind its various cuts and stabs and sawing, really makes you think just how they were able to make this. Automatons, not quite like it certainly, but similar in its restrictive, bony nature, were popular before the rise of digital technology and transistors and stuff. It was something from the 19th century. In that way, Scorn technology seems almost primitive, but it still is leagues and bounds ahead of our own. And does really make me think that if it is on Earth, if it does involve human beings, it's not our history. But hey, we get another achievement. And we actually wake up as a pregnant thing. Maybe not strictly a character in of itself, given that we really don't play as it for very long, and there's no real losing condition to when we do play it. But it is still basically 2.5 characters we play as now. Maybe you can argue 3, considering the parasite is somewhat of its own character, and yet it's still attached to you and does offer some help for healing and stuff like that. I've said before that the devs are incredibly secretive. They keep their cards close to you, and I was not expecting this, not in a million years. Another great thing about this scene is we can actually see our character, that thing that the devs ensured we knew as little about and couldn't get a good look at his face. Now we can see it in all its glory, in what might be one of the worst moments in its existence, being constantly stabbed and prodded for some strange reason, perhaps to ensure the connection is still happening, by this uncaring machine in hopes of being able to find some way to fix itself after nearly succumbing to the parasite's wrath. There's one last puzzle to solve, one last room to enter before the end of the game. You get this statue here of, you get this majestic mural, a bit hard to see when you first enter, but something depicting a multitudes of anatomies, muscles, bones, and organs in an artistic display. You also get a wrist key, and it's a unique animation for her, a non-reactive animation. It's overall a rather cool scene. But the mural itself, I think, represents almost Scorn's ultimate control over anatomy. After all, not only could they make organs and blood vessels do what it wants, it can make them bigger or smaller as it needs. those Scorn people are giants. The heads are larger than Scorn Guy's body. And there they are decorating the entrance to Ascension. In previous areas, there was some peculiarity about the fact that you need 2 people in order to progress through the puzzle. In normal society, there would have to be at least a few Scorn people there at any given time to ensure everyone's able to go through the doors and the machines are working and that stuff is getting done. This area is unique because it doesn't require 2 Scorn people. The means of opening that door, which does in fact require 2 individuals, are present and available. It's the shells, mere biological tools for progressing forward throughout wherever this leads to. In some ways, it even sort of subverts that sort of video gamey puzzle game issue that we've seen so many times in so many previous games and this game, and it is quite clever. Still don't know why these things effectively have 2 heads though. That's always gonna be a little bit weird for me, but I'm sure with some more thought and going through the art book again, I'll figure out something. And so, as you finally stop looking at the back of this thing's head, you put your second character here and cause the door to go down. But there's one problem. You're there, your other shell is keeping the door open. What do? Well, it turns out you can interact with this thing one more time. You can rip off one of its arms, and then you can take your character away from it over to the door. There's something rather surreal about carrying yourself. In gaming, there's first and third person, but there's the very rare second person, which people tend to define as you're controlling your character through someone else's eyes. This is more like first 0.5 person. You're seeing Scorn Guy through someone else's eyes, but you're not controlling Scorn Guy's body. Though given that his mind is now linked to the pregnant thing, in some ways you sort of are. It's not first person, it's not third person, it's not really second person, but it is unique, it is interesting, and it is something that makes for a rather fascinating end to the game. There's one problem I have, though. In this section, you have to stand on the panel there in order to lower that part of the door. In all the previous parts of Scorn, and gaming in general, if you leave the panel, the door raises or closes again. That's just how pressure plates work. I tried unplugging from this thing, but that just closes the door outright and prevents any sort of entry. As it turns out, you're supposed to step forward. Maybe if the panel was placed right next to the door, that wouldn't be an issue, but that does seem like a weird thing to have. In any case, you walk forward towards this misty horizon. You can't move your camera anywhere, unfortunately, and your pace slows down to a crawl, but you can tell this is a finishing moment. There's a vibrant light in the distance. There's statues of Scorn people melting into afar. Is this paradise? Is this ascension? Is this where Scorn Guy will finally meet peace? Or perhaps get truly fixed up and not have to suffer anymore? Unfortunately, you stop here, and what happens is a cutscene of you being attacked by the parasite and then permanently, involuntarily assimilated with it. And this is an ending a lot of people, myself included, had problems with. I don't think we had any delusion that we would have a happy ending, given all the horrible things that happens over time. But we really wanted there to be a better ending for our character. We really wanted him to succeed and thrive after enduring such pain and torment. And because the developers kept stressing that there are moral choices and you'll need to play through the game to get all the achievements, we all wondered, did we fuck up? Was there something we had to do, a place we had to go that would have changed this outcome? That maybe not a super thrilling, happy, fun ending, but one like Journey, which this ending already kind of is like, wandering into a light-bathed area. It'll leave you on a somber note, one not quite knowing where your character is going and what will happen to him, but thinking, maybe he'll be fine. 'Cause it won't be this. This horrible, immobile monstrosity. He came so close, and yet that just was not enough due to factors beyond his control. Nature is cruel. Scorn's world is cruel. And that's the end of the game. That's the last thing you see. Your poor protagonist permanently embedded in some fleshy monstrosity. Who knows what'll happen to the rest of Polis in due time, as its tendrils begin snaking out and absorbing more and more of the area. For what it's worth, I enjoyed my time with Scorn. I came into it with tempered expectations and mostly got them. It's not the 10 out of 10 game that I was deep down hoping it was, and I feel that I might have enjoyed it more if I didn't try to analyze every single image and video and concept art that's available on the internet. Given the discontent many people have felt, I do hope the devs are able and willing to implement some changes. One benefit of being a game in 2022 is that with enough patches and updates, anything could eventually be great. It doesn't just have to be a tool for lazy, incompetent, greedy developers. It can be something that is able to turn something that's already pretty good into something way, way better. And I think Scorn deserves that. For all the problems I have with the game, some of its designs, and certainly the marketing, it is still forever going to be a game that was important to me, one I've spent a lot of time thinking about, one that I continue to mull over the lore and implications of its world. It was almost there, and for what it was good. It's just a shame that it was so short and so bereft at the end. And I suppose that will have to end my analysis of the game, this overview of my extended thoughts on the level design, the puzzles, the mechanics, the enemies. My next video will be a more standard theory one, but I felt this was a more important video to make. The one that, if the developers do watch my videos, the one I want them to see the most. So, for anyone who might have stuck around this far, I hope you enjoyed the video, that gave you something to think about, and otherwise entertained you. Take care.